At a luxurious black grand piano covered with gold patterns sat Catherine Howard, mistress of an expensive estate. Catherine had inherited most of her fortune from her parents, who loved her immensely and fulfilled her for her. "Remember, Catherine, we don't last forever. One day you will have to make your own path in life," her father always admonished. "You must be strong and determined and control your own destiny. But you lose something in it by interfering a lot," Mom said. Such conversations are just necessary so that, despite her luxuries, she grows up not to be a spoiled girl, but able to stand up for herself. "Thank you for everything," Catherine exhaled, coming back from warm childhood memories to reality. She looked at the portrait of her parents above the fireplace. The elder Howards had devoted their entire lives to their only daughter, giving her all their energy and effort to fill Catherine's life with well-being and comfort. However, they also planted in their daughter the seeds of a strong will and drive to succeed. "Mrs. Catherine, shall we set the table?" The maid asked cautiously as she entered the room. "Will Mr. Michael be joining you?" "I don't know," Catherine shook her head sadly. "Set the table, but it's for me alone for now." It wasn't long ago that Catherine had wed an ordinary man, not a rich man as was the custom among the people in her circle. Catherine had always appreciated simplicity, a lack of prejudice, which was what set Michael apart from the successful and wealthy men she could have chosen. "Shall we sign a prenup?" suggested Catherine one day, one of the suitors, with whom she was dating before Michael appeared. "It's not like we're married yet," Catherine raised an eyebrow. "You do realize we don't want any problems in the future, if we suddenly decide to separate." "How much you value our love," Catherine replied. "I'm primarily a businessman," the suitor shrugged. They were all like that, practical, obsessed with money and rules. But Michael was different, sensitive, romantic, understanding. He already on the first date managed to make her head spin, and therefore in love to the years Catherine chose him, a man who made her feel genuinely happy and attractive. "Is Mr. Michael working late again?" the maid asked, arranging the dishes on the table. "Yes, working hard for our family," Catherine nodded. "I envy you, finding such a good man," said the maid. "I want to be happy too. Don't be sad. We will find you a husband," Catherine smiled sadly, "and you'll be even happier." Catherine turned away, looking wistfully out the window. Who would have thought that happiness would prove so short-lived? Even though Michael made it look like he was working, it was clear to Catherine that he was far from ambitious and would never reach her heights. "Maybe you want to start a business or do some work?" Catherine asked her soulmate from time to time. "I have a great job that I really like." Michael only shrugged his shoulders. "But what kind of job is it? I still haven't figured out what you do for a living." "I'm Luck's favorite." The rest of the details would be too boring, Michael guffawed as always. Catherine was angry, but always reminded herself that she had chosen this man precisely because he didn't seem like an asset-crazed snob. Yes, Michael seemed devoid of ambition, but they often spent time together, immersed in inspiring conversations about life, their dreams and plans. Despite his shortcomings, he was very romantic, attentive, always ready to support and protect his beloved. And before, it seemed that this was quite enough. Suddenly, the front door slammed, making the lady of the house and the maid flinch. "I'll go get a second set of cutlery," the maid smiled. "Of course, thank you," Catherine nodded. She herself got up from behind the piano and went to greet her lover. Yes, I am in the process. Soon this case will be solved," Michael nervously answered someone into the receiver of the phone. Catherine even froze around the corner, remaining invisible to him. It wasn't that she liked to eavesdrop. It was just that the conversation was clearly disturbing. "It's not easy to get that much money right away." "Yes, I realize that. But she's going to ask questions," Michael continued to say. As if sensing someone else's presence, he looked round furtively and lowered his voice. "I'll get it. Just give me some time." What could have happened? Catherine thought, putting a hand to her chest. Hearing the conversation, she suddenly felt a wave of sadness and frustration. Her heart raced, spreading a bad feeling through her body. She tried to calm herself down. After all, it's still my Michael. But shaking off the unpleasant suspicion wasn't so easy. The outdoor coffee shop sat right on the corner of a large shopping center building, a blooming green web wrapped around its walls, separating customers from the hustle and bustle of the street. "Veronica, I'm so nervous," Catherine said, rubbing the napkin on the table with her fingers. "Michael's been kind of distant lately, always with his phone going off somewhere. Calling, texting someone. He doesn't answer my questions. I can't figure out what's going on." "Has there been any other weirdness, Veronica?" Catherine's longtime friend asked. "Started coming back late. Drunk, says the negotiations at work are tough, has to stay out late. But I'm not stupid. I smelled someone else's perfume on his shirt once. I'm in business myself, Veronica, and I know what negotiations are like. Veronica looked sadly at her friend, then gently took her hand. You know, men are a mystery. Sometimes they do strange things, and it's confusing. But maybe he got another one, Veronica muttered quietly. Catherine gave a startled sigh. Looking intently into her friend's eyes, she said, "White treason at once? I'm so scared to imagine that I might lose him." Catherine, you're a beautiful, intelligent, wealthy woman, Veronica immediately began to reassure her friend. Just talk to him frankly. If anything comes to light, believe me, it's better to end it as soon as possible. God forbid, the children will still be born. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. Even just imagining such a thing was excruciatingly painful. Her heart shuddered painfully at the memory of Michael's cold stares and irritable behavior. Lately, they had even stopped talking, which finally depressed Catherine, making her feel completely unwanted in her own home. You deserve better, I'm sure, Veronica said. Thank you for supporting me, Catherine sobbed. Look, you should check his phone after all her friends said goodbye. No, something I can't. It's not nice. I don't recognize you at all. You were always the smart one, always thinking ahead, seeing right through people. And with this, Michael, you've turned into a romantic sissy. Veronica shook her head. I just love him, Catherine replied. Catherine felt a painful prick piercing through the very core of her soul. If only all these suspicions were true. If suddenly Michael had grown cold to her. No, she couldn't bear it. She had loved too much to be so cruelly disappointed. The evening gloom was creeping into the room. Catherine sat on the edge of the bed and flicked the screen of her phone with trembling fingers. Just a piece of software. I installed it on my phone too, so I can read texts and see who he's called, Veronica said, showing the app on her smartphone. Kind of makes me feel bad about the whole thing, Catherine grumbled. It's a peaceful life, though. You just discreetly download it to his phone too, and you can keep track of everything he does from it. Rather scolding herself for being overly suspicious, Catherine nevertheless followed her friend's advice. And now she sat on the edge of the bed with her heart ready to burst with pain. Leafing through meaningless messages from friends and colleagues, Catherine suddenly came across a text message with love content from a certain Annie. Her hands trembled. Her breathing became heavy and rage and resentment blazed in her eyes. How dare he, Catherine hissed. How could he go to such lengths, after everything that's happened between us? Tears covered her eyes. Catherine stood up and swiftly left the bedroom, ready to give Michael a huge scandal right now. It was time to clear things up, and if need be, put a stop to it. You bastard. You cheat. I've given him so much, she thought. Catherine, like a hurricane, rushed into the living room, then rushed to Michael's office, but even there her spouse was not to be found. So where are you? She hissed, going into the wardrobe. All of the unfaithful spouse's belongings were in place, except for the suit he usually wore to business negotiations. I see. Off to have fun, Catherine muttered resentfully. Her heart was now filled with pain, resentment, and also fear and confusion. Feelings completely unfamiliar to her until today. Feelings she hadn't been taught to deal with. Where? Why did he disappear at the worst possible moment? After all, I just wanted to talk, Catherine exclaimed. She dialed a familiar number, listened to a few beeps, and nervously dropped the call. No, I won't humiliate myself like that. I'll just wait for him to show up, she thought, trying to calm her frayed nerves. It was not a good morning. The landlady felt completely shattered. The fervor of the evening's quarrel was gone, and there was nothing but emptiness and deep disappointment in her soul. Nothing has changed, Catherine said in disgust, looking at the empty pillow beside her. But a whole day passed and Catherine still hadn't heard from Michael. This is getting way over the line. Where could he have gone, she thought. Anxiety was growing by the minute. Fear overwhelmed literally every action she took. By evening, she was ready to forgive Michael, only if he appeared on the doorstep. And by the end of the second day, Catherine could no longer fight the doubts and panic alone. Hello, I'd like to report a missing person, Catherine said, finally reaching the window of the duty desk. She decided to go to the police, hoping for quick cooperation and help. Been missing long? The duty officer inquired in a bored tone. 2 days ago. Doesn't answer the phone. He didn't take any belongings with him, just what he was carrying on his person and his car. Sorry, ma'am, but by law we have to wait a minimum of 72 hours after a missing person goes missing to start a search. Usually in cases like this, people return on their own if they have someone to return to. How so? Catherine felt herself begin to fall into an abyss of despair. The soul froze with endless expectation of the worst, but the heart, that restless heart, continued to beat with determination. Go home, wait for himself to declare himself. But if it's another 24 hours, we'll have to start the search from our side, the policeman advised with obvious irritation in his voice. Thank you, she said in an almost dead voice. All the way home, Catherine prayed unceasingly to catch the unfaithful, but at least alive Michael on her doorstep. Time passed slowly. The hands of the clock, as if mocking, barely crawled on the dial. Any resolve in her heart had finally faded. It was simply overpowered by an overwhelming anxiety. It wasn't until a couple of days later that the police began their search. We've checked with the cameras to see where he last drove his car, and here the policeman hesitantly held out a photograph to Catherine that showed the burned-out car. Oh dear, she exclaimed. No was all she could exhale. Was Michael hurt? What hospital is he in? Something terrible descended over her head. Catherine was already regretting being so angry with Michael over that damn text message. It seemed that her hatred bearing down on her unfaithful spouse's head made him suffer the same agony. We found a burnt corpse in the driver's seat in the interior of the car, a police officer said. Catherine's legs went under. She barely kept herself from falling by grabbing the door jamb. It's so damaged that it's impossible to tell at once who it was. The policeman hastened to reassure her. Can you say anything about it? Even more doubtful of the correctness of his actions, the policeman took out a second photograph and held it out to the lady of the house. The new photo showed the body of someone Catherine had waited so long for, lying in a half-destroyed car, and who was no longer in this world. It can't be, she whispered, her lips numb. Groaning in pain and shock, Catherine pressed herself harder against the door jamb, as if trying to stop the earth from spinning beneath her feet. Michael, love, her eyes were full of tears, but cruel fate was in no hurry to give room for grief and pain. Can you identify anything in this photo? The policeman kept saying something, showing pictures of some objects and pieces of clothing. We need you to. The body is badly burned. You need to go through a lineup anyway to confirm your identity, the policeman said in a serious tone. He touched Catherine's shoulder, but she only glanced meaninglessly at his hand with a glassy stare. And you think I'm ready now to look at the remains of the man I loved more than my own life? She said in a trembling voice. All right, the policeman exhaled tiredly. What about identifying the deceased's belongings? There's no way that can be postponed, you understand. Your husband was an orphan. There's no one else to ask about the identification. His identity has to be established to close your missing persons report. Bureaucracy. But you must realize that. Paperwork for paperwork's sake. Don't worry. You won't have to go to the morgue. So if there will be on him some trouser belt, some trousers or shirt, cufflinks, that means it's him, for sure, the policeman began to exhort. Ready to pick Catherine up if she fainted? Okay, I can still do that, she said in a colorless voice. Only I need to recover at least a little. I'm completely out of shape right now. I don't even know what to do. I'm sorry to disturb you, the guest said with pity in his voice, but it will still have to be done. I understand. Just give me a couple of hours, okay? The policeman frowned disapprovingly, but seeing Catherine's condition, he didn't insist. Here's my card. There's the address of the station and my phone number. As soon as you're ready, dial it. But don't take too long. Okay. Catherine nodded absently. Clutching the cardboard rectangle with cold fingers, she felt nothing but emptiness in her head. Her heart seemed to stop beating, and a black, gaping emptiness settled in her soul. It was as if the one important thing that gave her emotion had been ripped out, leaving only an icy numbness. Catherine sat behind the wheel of her car, still shaken by the terrible news of Michael's death. Her heart was overwhelmed with grief, pain, and an unfathomable emptiness. God, well, why did things have to turn out this way? Catherine felt ill at ease. Her hands were shaking on the steering wheel and tears were involuntarily running down her cheeks. What the hell was that? The motorway was almost empty, but in the distance Catherine noticed a little girl standing on the side of the road in an old coat and waving. Catherine's broken heart could not leave her indifferent to the child. The little girl is all alone. What is she doing here? Catherine pulled over to the side of the road, got out of the car and approached the girl. Honey, what are you doing here? It's very unsafe to be standing in the road in a snowstorm like this. Is there nowhere for you to take shelter? Catherine asked anxiously. The little girl with the pale face and burning eyes looked at her with sorrow and some panic. Auntie, I need to get to town right away. My mom has a high fever, and we don't have a pharmacy in our village, and we don't know what to do. Mummy is very ill, the crumb whispered, hiding her shivering fingers in her sleeves. Did you go to town alone? All alone. No one else. The girl sniffed her nose. What's your name? Hi. Jennifer. What's yours? And I'm Catherine. Yes, you're freezing completely. Hearing the girl's story, Catherine felt her heart clench with compassion and helplessness. Alone on the snow-covered motorway, Jennifer was in desperate need of help, but no one was in a hurry to lend her a hand. Come on, honey, get in the car. You need to warm up, Catherine said, trying to squeeze out a smile. Jennifer took a timid step forward, but then stopped. It was as if she was wary of the stranger, but also desperately wanted to trust her, to have someone adult to solve her problems. Don't be afraid, I'll take you into town, Catherine said, peering out at the increasing snowstorm. Only we need to hurry. The girl smiled gratefully and quickly climbed into the parlor. Catherine felt the child's hand trembling in her palm, which spurred her into action even more. The engine grunted relentlessly. They pulled out into the desolate, snow-covered expanse, an icy wind whipping through. There was silence in the cabin. The little girl rubbed her frozen palms against each other fearfully. Catherine tried to think of what to do with the unfortunate girl. What's your mum's name? Catherine broke the silence. Vivian. She's a very nice person. I love her, and I'm afraid because she's ill. I'm sure she's very good, Catherine nodded. We'll try to get to town as soon as possible. But tell me this, where's your daddy? Why didn't he walk you out? Where is Papa? I don't know. I've only seen him in pictures. What happened to him? I don't know. Mummy doesn't like to talk about him. Catherine heard more sadness in the girl's voice and decided not to develop the unpleasant topic for the little girl. We need to distract her somehow. It's getting quite depressing, Catherine thought, fearing the girl might go into shock. Jennifer, tell me about your village. How do you live there? She blinked and then quietly began to talk about her simple family, their life and how they stuck together despite adversity. Catherine listened with kindness and understanding, feeling that this meeting was no accident, that they could be a source of hope for each other. You are very brave since you decided to rush out into the night alone to help your mum, Catherine said. Jennifer replied sadly. It's just that I love her. What happened to your mum, Vivienne? Why did she get so sick? Was coming home from work. Yeah, she fell into a wormhole the other day. Wanted to take a shortcut so I wouldn't be alone for too long. That's what ended up happening. Catherine shook her head once again. She was sorry that the little girl had to go through so much at her age. Jennifer looked about 10 years old, but her eyes already gave away a lot of experience. Okay, Jennifer, let's do this, Catherine said as she pulled over to the side of the road. I'll take you to the drugstore, and then I have a nasty place to stop at, but I'm not taking you with me. You'll sit in the car while I get there. Okay. Okay, I agree, she nodded. Jennifer warmed up a bit on the road. Her cheeks had turned pink, and she didn't look so lost anymore. Catherine slowly got out of the car, leaving it in a car park just outside of town. She looked back at Jennifer and decided it was best not to take her with her. This place is too gloomy, Catherine thought. Where she was going was too frightening for more than just a young soul. Hello, anyone here? Catherine said hello. Hello. The same policeman she had already seen earlier today spoke again. I never bothered to ask your name, Catherine muttered guiltily. Albert the man nodded. Come along. This room is where all the stuff is laid out. Entering the storage room, Catherine struggled to hold back tears. That's his jacket, she whispered. Her voice trembled with emotion. I recognized that color of the texture. It was definitely Michael. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. I bought it myself. Catherine shook her head. She slowly lowered the jacket back onto the table and looked around at the other items. Each of them bore witness to a life, a love, a betrayal that may have been the cause of Michael's death. I sympathize with your grief, Albert said quietly. Go home. You're going to need a lot of strength. Back to the car, Catherine walked with a heavy heart. In the silence of the night, all alone, racked with grief, Catherine was alone with her thoughts and memories of the dead man. An even greater longing filled her heart. What happened? She said tiredly, glancing at Jennifer. The girl, small, defenseless, was looking at Catherine with frightened eyes. Her face expressed a strange tension. Jennifer, I'm not angry at all, Catherine whispered, trying to reassure her. I'm sorry, Aunt Catherine. I didn't mean to. The girl sobbed. I was bored, and I accidentally opened the drawer and a picture fell out. How did you get a picture of my daddy? What? Catherine shook her head. Jennifer held up the plain picture of Michael that she kept in the car. Is that really my daddy? Repeated the girl once more. We have similar pictures at home, only he's not as old there. Inside Catherine's mind, everything turned upside down. She felt embarrassed, hurt, and incredibly confused. Her eyes reflected fear and anxiety. She hugged Jennifer, trying to calm them both down. A terrible guess flashed through her mind. What if Michael cheated on me with her mom? Jennifer. Listen to me carefully, Catherine said, trying to gather her thoughts. That picture is of my husband, Michael, and I don't think he could be your dad. They probably just look alike. Jennifer looked at Catherine with incomprehension in her eyes. Her face reflected a mixture of bitterness and confusion. No, I'm sure of it. I mean, I look at him every day and I recognize Daddy from 1,000 others, she said in a weak, trembling voice. Catherine nodded, unable to hold back the tears that began to roll down her cheeks. They continued to sit in the car like two lost souls trying to find comfort in each other's arms. Catherine realized that if all this was true, she would have to somehow tell Jennifer that her daddy was no longer alive. Let's go take your mom her medication, Catherine said, wiping away her tears. You can show the way. Do you know how to get to your village? Yes, Jennifer nodded, still fearfully clutching Michael's photograph to her chest. Catherine sat behind the wheel. Doubt and fear encompassed her thoughts. A blizzard raged outside her window, and she feared Jennifer wouldn't be able to reach her home without help. A desire burned inside her to help and protect the girl. Almost there, the little girl broke the silence. There's a turnoff over there, and then it's down the main street. Good, how are you feeling? Catherine asked. Fine. God, what snowdrifts, Catherine exclaimed as she drove around another traffic jam. Slowly making her way along the snow-covered motorway, she had already been stuck twice, but each time her foreign car had found a way to get out of the jam, bailing out the owner. That's my house over there, Jennifer said, pointing her finger in the right direction. Finally, they made it. Catherine parked as best she could, turned off the engine, and helped Jennifer out of the cabin. She clutched the child's palm in her hand, the fingers of the other gently holding the photograph she had taken from the girl. Come on. There's a path. I left the door unlocked, Jennifer said, trying to shout over the wind. Catherine followed, and then got into the house. Even though they walked together, Catherine knocked on the door, drawing the landlady's attention. Daughter, where have you been? Vivienne immediately exclaimed, looking out at the knock. We brought you some medicine for your runny nose, Jennifer answered, and handed her mother the clear bag of pills they had bought at the pharmacy. What were you doing in town in a snowstorm like this? Vivienne grabbed her heart and pressed her back against the wall. She looked sickly enough, but she was worried about her daughter. Looking at her, Catherine felt compassion. Don't worry. Aunt Catherine looked after me, she said. I'm sorry. I don't even know how to apologize to you for all the trouble I've caused, Vivienne said, as if she had just noticed the guest who had come with her daughter. It was nothing. I was on my way, Catherine shrugged. Take your pills. I hope you feel better. Why are we standing in the doorway? Come on, and Vivienne called everyone into the house. Catherine followed the girl and her mum. Looking at the poor surroundings, she waited until Vivienne took her daughter to her room, took a fever pill, and only then began the main question. Vivienne, tell me, do you have a photograph like this? Catherine asked, holding out a photograph of Michael. Vivienne stared at the picture Jennifer had found in the glove compartment of the car and immediately frowned. Where did you get it? The landlady asked. You see, Jennifer said it was her dad. Yes, I know our history well. But how did you get a picture of my half-brother? What? Your half-brother? But what about Jennifer? Vivienne exhaled tiredly and lowered herself into a chair, nodding at her guest to do the same. You know, it's complicated. When my daughter got older, she started asking questions, and I couldn't think of anything better. He's not my husband, Jennifer thinks. I'm just saying that so she'll have some association with her father. I can't tell her that Dad left us a long time ago. Catherine felt a bitterness in her heart. She realized that Jennifer hadn't lived in a complete family, and the worst part was that the truth would traumatize the child even more. She looked at Vivienne with compassion and pity in her eyes. I'm sorry, I didn't know. I realized the situation is difficult, Catherine whispered. What did you say about your brother? I thought Michael didn't have any relatives. I'm sorry, how do you know him? Vivienne asked. We got married a few years ago, Catherine explained quietly. Tell me, please. I need to know what kind of man he's. Catherine couldn't finish the sentence about Michael's death. She just didn't have the strength. Vivienne was having a hard enough time as it was. Catherine had not yet decided how to convey such tragic news. Vivienne nodded. Her eyes were full of bitterness and regret. "My half-brother Michael. We spent our childhood together, but fate separated us. Our parents got back together. But then they started drinking. Michael ended up in an orphanage. The child welfare authorities thought he'd be better off there than with his parents, but he ended up in trouble with the law. We used to see each other occasionally, but he was always asking for money and cheated." Catherine felt that with every word Vivian said. The ground was shifting more and more out from under her feet. She couldn't believe that she had been so far removed from Michael's true family history all this time. Why didn't I know about all of this? And how come it all remained hidden for so many years, Catherine thought, trying to hang on. "I've never heard anything objectionable about him," she said in a shaky voice. Vivian said with a shaky voice. "Apparently, Michael was good at hiding his problems. He was a skillful swindler, cleverly disguising his real identity. We were all deceived." Catherine felt defeated. Catherine looked at Vivian, seeing the reflection of her own emotions in her eyes. Pain and disappointment encompassed them both. "What are we going to do now?" Catherine asked and exclaimed. "You'll probably go home, and I'm sorry, I'll keep lying. Not much will change in the world for a daughter. But believe me, you were living with a man you didn't know at all. Michael died a few days ago. I went to identify his belongings today because the body was so burnt that there were no distinctive marks." Vivian suddenly coughed. "Look, I'm sorry that Michael was able to cause you so much pain, but you really don't know what you're talking about," Vivian said with difficulty. "I won't believe he's dead until I see it with my own eyes. And even then, I won't accept 100% probability. My brother has done me a great deal of harm in my life." She shuddered with coughing again, clamping a tissue over her mouth. "Well, I'm sorry to bother you. I should probably go," Catherine said, embarrassed. "I'll be on my way. Sorry again, of course. And thank you," Vivian breathed out, walking out into the hallway. Catherine sighed with some relief. The difficult conversation about her dead husband was over, at least for this day. She felt like she needed to leave, to go home, to digest everything that had been said. But when she stepped outside, she met a wall of snow. "There's no way to get through," Catherine whispered, looking around. "We'll have to wait until morning or hope that someone will drive by and help." There was really no point in hanging around outside waiting for someone. The wind was blowing harder and harder, so that no one in the whole village thought of turning their nose up at the street. "You'll learn," Catherine muttered, walking back into the hallway. She returned to Vivian's house and found her and Jennifer in the living room. The atmosphere in the room was peaceful, as if they had created their own little island of warmth and comfort in this snowy captivity. Nothing had really changed for them with Michael's death, just a little family that continues its little life. "Catherine, you're back," Vivian said in surprise. "The road snowed in. I can't get out," Catherine shrugged. "Can I stay here until some help arrives?" "Sure, stay as long as you need to. I'll make up a bed for you on the sofa." "No, that's okay. Can you tell me where you have a tractor around here? Can I rent one?" "You won't see anyone until morning," Vivian shook her head. Vivian said, "Stay." Catherine nodded gratefully. She realized that Vivian and Jennifer had their own difficult experiences, but despite that, they had opened their doors for her to help in her talp at home. Catherine sat down in the chair next to them and allowed herself to relax a little. "Catherine, are you all right? Why are you sad? Is it because of the road?" Jennifer asked. "No, darling. I'm just a little tired." Inside, however, mixed emotions raged. Catherine was still worried about talking about Michael, but now there was added anxiety about her future. She felt confined, trapped in this snowy captivity, and it made her feel helpless. Jennifer climbed out of her mother's embrace, walked over to Catherine and put her hand on her knee. "So let's you and I find something to do to take our minds off of everything. Maybe play some board games or watch a film?" Catherine smiled gratefully. She realized that she needed to take her mind off her thoughts and let herself enjoy the moment. She agreed, and together they spent the evening playing. And even for a couple of hours, she stopped thinking about her collapsed life. Spending a few days visiting Vivian and Jennifer had to be done. Catherine struggled to get out of the snow, barely clearing the roads with the tractor, and headed home. "Thanks for the shelter," she said goodbye to Vivian. "It was nice to meet you. Come round again sometime. Jennifer seems to have grown fond of you." Catherine had so much to do, including organizing Michael's funeral, that her heart was pounding with tension. Every minute was precious. "Something's not right here," Catherine said, as she pulled up to the gate. As soon as she stepped out of the car, she felt something wrong. Catherine entered her house and her eyes turned to the ruined room and the open safe. The money meant for Michael's funeral had been stolen. It was as if the key had been thrown on the floor on purpose, taunting the landlady. "Who would have the key?" Catherine said in a deadened voice as she looked round the overturned office. But who could have known they were hidden here? Her heart clenched with grief and rage. She realized that all of this had happened while she had been at Vivienne and Jennifer's. But who was ruthless enough to rob her house? Emotions raged inside: fear, anger, despair. "As if I didn't have enough trouble. And now this," Catherine shouted. The lid of the hiding place had been twisted off. Only 2 people knew of its existence, one of whom was already dead. Catherine began to think feverishly about how to get out of the situation. "Okay, let's say I still have some money left," she said, pacing around the overturned office. "It should be enough for Michael's funeral." But Catherine immediately restrained herself. She couldn't afford to doubt or get upset right now. It was necessary to gather all her strength to organize the farewell ceremony. As it should be, Michael's funeral was the saddest and most mournful day of her life. Catherine didn't know who to invite to the farewell, so she just made a mailing to all the contacts in Michael's phone that she found in the car. Some of the guests did get together. "Excuse me, may I have everyone's attention?" A man's voice suddenly sounded. An unfamiliar businessman with sad eyes took Catherine under the elbow and gently took her aside. He spoke to her in a quiet but confident voice. "I know this is going to sound delusional, but your husband is alive. He borrowed a large sum of money from me and paid it back yesterday. I don't know where he got it from, but I saw him with my own eyes, alive and unharmed." The businessman's words literally pierced Catherine, making her heart sink. "It can't be," she breathed out, trying to cope with shock. Michael burned up in that car. There was no way he could have survived. "Maybe there was someone else in the car," the businessman replied. "I know he was playing cards at an underground casino, and that's probably the only way Michael was able to pay back the money he borrowed from me," the businessman said with a hint. "What on earth is this?" Mixed feelings filled Catherine: surprise, hope, and anger. She couldn't believe that Michael could do this to her. He was alive, and all of his absences and mysterious trips were due to his dangerous passion for gambling. After all these years together, could he really do this to me? "I don't know how well you know your husband, but in our circles he is considered a rather unreliable subject. I have come here today to warn you of this deception." "It's just as Vivienne said," Catherine thought, feeling her heart torn apart by deceit, betrayal, and grief, but she was determined. She had to find out the truth, find Michael, and make sense of all the chaos that had engulfed her life. Catherine was badly shaken by the revelations of the businessman, who later introduced himself as Bill. Now she understood. Michael's constant absences had a connection with his passion for gambling. Everything began to make sense. And now Catherine finally understood why her husband so often disappeared and returned with money. There was no business, just cards. "Strange that in the end only you, in fact a stranger, came to help me," said Catherine. "I have nothing better to do," Bill shrugged. The man with sad eyes, in addition to everything else, turned out to be a widower. At first Catherine was wary of his help, but then she realized Bill is really just lonely, and this adventure helps at least a little variety of life after the death of his wife. "So, look," Bill said, showing some papers. "I've spent days and nights constructing a logical chain of events." Bill continued to talk about his plan to catch Michael, and Catherine just listened, unable to answer anything. Her whole being was filled with an internal struggle between the desire to believe in the man she had once loved and the unwavering certainty of his guilt. Her heart was torn with grief and betrayal, but she could not allow herself to break. "Anyway, then I hired a detective, and he tracked Michael down at the flat," Bill said. What Catherine perked up. "Well, Michael just moved all the loot to another place and didn't even think to hide it somewhere until better times. I'm sorry, I didn't wait for your approval and just called the police." "Why didn't you consult me?" Catherine was instantly turned on. Her heart sank with longing and grief at the realization that she had been deceived after all. Catherine realized that her life would never be the same again, but it was as if she wasn't prepared to go through all this, even to find the truth and ensure justice. "Look, I'm sorry, okay." Bill raised his open palms in front of him. "But this man is dangerous, and you don't seem to be able to think straight right now because of your feelings for him. It wasn't your personal decision. I had a right to be involved. Yes, but I chose to protect you and provided evidence to law enforcement." It was a few days filled with questioning, investigation, and worry. "Why wasn't I called before the investigators?" Catherine asked, confused. Anger began to slowly subside in her soul. She began to understand what Bill was saying, telling her that he wanted to protect her, only imagining that she would have to go through a series of interrogations and explanations. Catherine felt dizzy, weak. No, seeing Michael through the bars was beyond her. I specifically asked not to disturb you just yet. Bill shook his head. But it's over now. Yeah, he's going to be locked up for a long time under fraud, burglary, breaking and entering. It's a whole bunch of stuff. I don't think I'm ever going to feel safe. Catherine put her arm around my shoulders. Don't worry, I'm here for you. So put protection from the bad guys in my hands. Bill winked. By the way, do you want to see him? No, Catherine exclaimed, covering her face with her palms. Good, Dan, I'll ask that the trial be held without you, only with a lawyer. Strangely, but despite Bill's promises, after Michael's trial, Catherine did not feel better. On the contrary, she felt only bitterness and sadness. I'm going to see Vivienne, Michael's half-sister. Take my mind off things for a while. I think she too has a right to know how it all ended. All right, Bill agreed. The whole story had helped them to bond. They kept in touch even after the investigation was over, and Bill kept Catherine safe. Left alone, she was pleased by such courting, and she even began to feel some sympathy. Besides, I think there's something wrong with Vivienne. I rang her the other day, and she couldn't even speak without coughing. I'm sensing it's a bad cold from the wormwood, and was there ever a wormhole? After saying goodbye to Bill, Catherine switched off the phone and turned down a familiar suburban road. Her heart pounded restlessly, making her worry for her friend. Hi, how are you doing? Catherine asked loudly as she entered the familiar hallway. Catherine, are you? Vivienne said weakly from her room. Come on in, mate. You're not well at all, Catherine said excitedly, finding her mistress lying on the bed. Jennifer's mother looked haggard, thin. It's nothing. I just didn't sleep well, Vivienne said, dropping her hand to the sheet. Even Jennifer doesn't believe you anymore, Catherine said reproachfully. Now more than ever she realized that the situation with the illness was more serious than she had expected. That's enough pretense. Let's go to the hospital, Catherine said sternly. No way. I'm not going anywhere, and don't even argue. Catherine helped her friend into the car, and 40 minutes later they were already in the emergency room of the best city clinic. Here is the patient I asked about, said Catherine, saying hello to the doctor who came out to them. Well, let's do an examination, Mr. Carl smiled. The hospital took the necessary tests, and a few hours later Catherine received the terrible news. Vivienne was found to have cancer in an advanced stage. I'm sorry, your friend delayed too long. The doctor waved his hands. But there's something that can be done, isn't there? Catherine exhaled doomedly. I'm sorry. The news hit her heart. Catherine realized with a shudder that time was now working against them. Tell me, will she be discharged? I wouldn't advise it. She'll get decent care here, painkillers and all. She'll only suffer at home, Mr. Carl nodded upwards, not finishing the sentence. Can I see her? Catherine whispered, forcing herself not to cry right now. Of course, the doctor led her, showing her to the right room. The white walls, the smell of medicine, all of it was scary. This hospital had witnessed unbearable pain many times and was already used to it. But for Catherine, this was a first. Hello, friend, she tried to smile when she saw Vivienne. They won't let me out, she asked tiredly. It's going to be all right. Yeah, I realize it won't be. Catherine pressed her palms to her face to wipe away the hot tears. It was unbearable to watch Vivienne fading, but she had to hold on for her friend's sake. Catherine, I know my days are numbered, and I can't be there for Jennifer. Don't say that. We're going to find a cure. We'll find a way to help you. You know as well as I do that it's too late for that. Vivienne smiled weakly. The disease is too advanced. I beg you to promise me one thing. What do you want? What do I have to promise? Catherine breathed out through her tears. Help me. Promise me that you won't leave Jennifer. Take care of her, Vivienne said with difficulty. You know I'll do anything to help her, Catherine said, squeezing her friend's hand. Thank you, Catherine. I know she will be safe with you. My Jennifer will be happy. I promise. I will love and care for her as if she were my own daughter. You can rest easy, Catherine said, swallowing the lump in her throat. Thank you. You know, I'm glad I'm not alone right now. Vivienne leaned back on the pillow. Her hand loosened and the instruments began to beep suspiciously. It seemed that with Vivian's departure, some part of Catherine's heart had gone too. Only the promise of taking care of Jennifer kept her strong. She had to be okay, because the girl was going through so much worse right now. It had only been a couple of months, and it felt like yesterday. Sad Catherine sighed, thinking about what they had left. "You were always wise," Bill said. She snuggled into his shoulder. A few months after Vivian's tragic death, Catherine became Jennifer's legal guardian and found a new love in Bill. They decided to start dating. "Thank you. You saved us all from Michael, and were honest enough to return most of the money you received as payment for the debt. They were stolen from you, weren't they?" Bill smiled. "Yes, and a sincere relationship with the one you love is worth more than any money. Listen, I don't know how you feel about it, but..." Catherine hesitated, not knowing how to break the news. "What is it?" Bill was immediately concerned. "No, it's nothing. It's just that I took a test, and it was positive." Catherine froze, afraid of getting a negative reaction. They had never discussed the possibility of having children of their own with Bill, and now it had happened, so unexpectedly. "We're having a baby?" Bill asked in surprise. "That's wonderful." He began to embrace his beloved, covering her face with kisses and sincerely rejoicing at the imminent arrival of an heir. Catherine exhaled happily, feeling the tension that had been hanging over her all these months recede. Catherine thought that perhaps altogether, she and Bill, Jennifer and their future baby, could start a new life, leaving behind all the terrible adventures of the past. An expensive car pulled up outside the police station where Michael was now being held to be transported to jail. The spectacular blonde Annie, Michael's mistress, got out of the driver's seat, fixed her hair, and headed for the entrance. "I'm certainly glad to see you, but why are you here?" Michael muttered, looking at his mistress. "Because I couldn't forgive that bitch Catherine for taking my lover away," Annie said sourly. "Look, I know you're capable of a lot of things, but don't make it worse." Michael shook his head. Honey, I've already planted a bomb under her peaceful life," Annie said triumphantly. "By the way, did you know that while you're resting in the bunkhouse, she's already got a new man?" "I don't care who she's got. What did you do?" "Our Catherine got knocked up by her new boyfriend. I took the opportunity to slip him an anonymous note saying, 'Billy, you're being played. The baby's not yours.'" "Do you think he'd believe it?" Michael raised an eyebrow skeptically. "I found out something about that man with the sad eyes. He looks fluffy, but he's a fire." Annie smiled smugly. "I bet there's already a fire raging in their family nest." Catherine's house was not exactly peaceful today. It had been months since she'd found out she was pregnant. Everything had been going smoothly, and it seemed as if her new life would allow her to forget the fears of the past forever. Until this morning when Bill went mad. "How could you hide it?" "I thought our relationship was based on trust," Bill shouted dismissively, glaring at Catherine. "What's the big deal? Don't pretend you don't understand." "I don't," Catherine shouted and immediately cringed, feeling her stomach tighten. "This baby was supposed to be a blessing. And you," Bill gasped resentfully, turning away in the other direction with a look of defiant disgust on his face. "Can you explain properly what's going on?" Catherine said, feeling the pain in her lower abdomen intensify. The stress she had experienced was definitely not good for her. Bill was going off the rails, not explaining his displeasure in any way. He'd been yelling at her since this morning, and then pretending that Catherine didn't exist, only to come at her a few minutes later with another round of vague recriminations. "I hate to say it out loud," Bill said. "Then shut up, for God's sake." Catherine exhaled painfully. "Why should I be silent?" "Because I think I'm having her baby. I'm not interested in your nonsense right now." "Call an ambulance," Catherine shouted, unable to hold back the pain any longer. She lowered her head, feeling tears running down her cheeks. Catherine pressed her hand to her stomach, as if trying to protect her unborn child from the storm around her, as if she wanted to hug the baby even tighter, giving her love and protection to the baby. However, Catherine's face expressed only agonizing fear and thoughts of a bleak future. The incredible tension and stress caused by the monstrous quarrel played a cruel joke on Catherine. Due to nervous tension, she ended up in hospital and struggled for days with the threat of miscarriage. She was on the verge of tears, afraid for her child and disappointed that some anonymous note had managed to cause such pain to their family. How could you believe that note? How could you even think that our baby wasn't yours? I never betrayed you, Bill." "I didn't know, Catherine. I was scared, confused. I didn't know how to react. But you believed her. You believed this evil lie that no one knew. I'm torn with pain, Bill, because of your mistrust, because of this fight Our child is in danger, Catherine exhaled bitterly. Bill only bowed his head. Only now, when the passion subsided, he realized how foolishly he had behaved. It was never too late to realize one's mistakes. But because of his absurd behavior, they had almost lost the baby. Catherine, I'm so sorry. I was stupid. I didn't mean to do that kind of damage. I really didn't. I shouldn't have reacted that way. I should be supporting you, not making things worse, Bill said. Catherine leaned back tiredly on the pillows of her hospital bed. She could feel the irreparable damage that had already been done, felt her heart just bursting with anxiety. What if another letter came tomorrow? Would you take it out on us again? She said quietly. It's impossible. It's impossible, Catherine. Bill waved his hands hastily. While you were in the hospital, I had my people, who helped to bring Michael to the surface. Check who planted the anonymous letter. They found that several cameras had captured. I'm not interested in your detective games, Catherine closed her eyes tiredly. We have to show our daughter and son that we love them regardless of all this. We have to be strong, overcome this pain, for them and for us. Yeah, that's right. That's why I did everything I could to keep our family safe in the future, Bill said. In the end, we found out from the cameras that it was Michael's mistress, a certain Annie. She works at your company, by the way. What? Yes, but I've already informed your security team. They're going to look into why she has so much free time to go around during the workday, planting anonymity. It turns out, Catherine shook her head. I'm sorry. I promise it will never happen again. I can protect you from all the schemers, Bill promised fervently. Taking her palm in his hand, I did make a stupid mistake. I got nervous. I gave in to doubt. But I realized that without you, I'm not happy. Even if it wasn't my baby, you're my joy, my sunshine. And look, who else is here? He left the room and returned with Jennifer. Mom, Catherine, you're not going to heaven like Mummy? Are you? The little girl asked. Of course not. On the contrary, soon I will come back to you with a brother or sister. Catherine smiled happily, hugging her daughter. The father said goodbye to his dying daughter and left the room. And bumping into a fortune teller on the street, MP4. William sat in the grandstand of a large sports hall and watched with admiration his 17-year-old daughter Amanda, who at that moment was demonstrating wonders of flexibility and artistry in an improvised arena made of mats. The girl lightly made a long silk ribbon dutifully curl around her slender legs, and then made a sharp turn, throwing the tip of the ribbon in the air and catching it deftly as her body gracefully rotated around its own axis. The hall immediately erupted in applause, and a happy smile flashed across Amanda's face. After waving goodbye to the audience, the young girl left the mat, and her performance was over. Dad, what do you think? Amanda asked her father with excitement in her voice, tightening the laces of her light-colored trainers. What can I say? You're a professional, sweetheart. A real fairy on stage, William answered her with a smile. If I hadn't seen you working 10 hours a day in the gym, I'd never have thought that all that fluttering around with ribbons was such a hell of a job. Oh, come on, shrugged her shoulders. Standard workouts. I have nothing special. Olympic champions, they work with such dedication that I never dreamt of in my worst nightmares. Can you imagine that they sometimes sleep only 4 hours a night and then go straight to training? I'm just an amateur compared to them. Amanda shook her head, and her father gently stroked his daughter's arm instead of saying anything else. He knew very well how important rhythmic gymnastics was for her, and how much time and effort her daughter devoted to this beautiful but incredibly hard activity. You are always downplaying your efforts and your talent, William said softly. You remind me a lot of Mum. She, too, always doubted herself when it came to putting her paintings up for sale in galleries. Always afraid of large-scale exhibitions. Amanda looked at him with a slight sadness. If you knew how much I miss her, Dad. Amanda said thoughtfully and adjusted the antique silver bracelet on her arm, the only memory of Vivian's mother that she had left after her death. Her father had once given his fiancée this lovely bauble as a token of his intense love, and she had never taken it off since. When her daughter turned 12, William gave her a bracelet. Vivian and the girl, as well as her mother, always wore it on her right hand. Honey, you did just fine. Mum would be proud of you, her father assured her. Believe me, after all, it's still just a preliminaries. You have plenty of time to perfect the elements you're not quite sure of. Amanda looked at her father with genuine gratitude and love. You know, I'm incredibly lucky to have a father. You are the best daddy in the world." The girl hugged her father's neck and lightly kissed him on the cheek. "Are you going to work again now?" "Yes," William said with a sigh. "What can I do if my managers can't make a single deal without me?" Father and daughter looked at each other understandingly, and then laughed. Both of them knew perfectly well that there was nothing to do with managers. It was just that William, being a successful businessman, liked to plan everything himself and make deals on his own terms. That's why he often stayed in his office until late at night or traveled for weeks at a time. The businessman did not trust his business to anyone, not even his most trusted people, and preferred to keep control over everything that happened inside his company. The same humor helped him to diffuse the situation at times when his daughter would have liked to spend a few more hours with her father. Amanda realized, however, that this was unfortunately not possible. "Okay, thank you for coming to the viewing today," she said to William. "It meant a lot to me, really. Daughter, remember one thing: you will always be my priority. No matter what happens, always," William said again. After that, the two of them got into his luxury car and headed to the businessman's country mansion. After dropping Amanda off at home and saying goodbye to her, he went straight to his office. Today, William had an important case scheduled, and he was very much hoping that this time luck would smile on him. The partners from France, with whom the businessman had long dreamed of concluding a contract, had finally paid attention to the success of his firm. Now William very much expected to conclude a very favorable deal with them. While he and the driver were traveling, the man involuntarily plunged into his own memories. Few people, looking at this still young man of 45 years old, would think that he was born and raised in the most ordinary family. However, this is exactly how it was. William's parents worked at the same factory, his father as a welder in the hot shop, and his mother as a cook in the factory canteen. It was not easy for young William to work his way up through his own social environment. The guy dreamed of big money and serious business almost from childhood. He did not fit in with the ideals of the so-called working youth of those years. Some considered him an upstart, and some directly called him a loser and warned that the desire for more will only come out to his detriment. And William should not get involved with anything more complicated than construction tools or blueprints. However, the young man did not consider it shameful to be a white crow among his peers and went steadily towards his goal, the development of business. At home, William also did not strongly support it, but his father, unlike his mother, who was terribly worried about the future of her not overly ambitious son, at least believed that the boy can still do something. "You shouldn't be so worried about him," Judy said. "Stephen, William's father. He's a bright lad, and he studies all day long." "He'll do well in the big city," said Stephen. "Why should he waste his health in a factory with us for the rest of his life?" Judy only shook her head and cried, "Stephen, darling, look at him. What kind of a businessman is our son? It's ridiculous. He's so frail, so weak, he even got an exemption in physical education. They'll make fun of him there, that's all." William himself was absolutely sure that he planned to succeed, and therefore intensively prepared for entry to the Faculty of Economics all summer after graduation from high school. Hard work and persistence of the guy was eventually rewarded. Having entered the budgetary place at the university, William immediately moved to New York, where he was even allocated a room in the student dormitory. The guy's mother to the last did not believe that her poor boy was leaving to conquer the big city. However, her husband explained to her that such an intelligent and talented guy, such as their son was, simply does not belong in the province. The countryside is dying out. You see, Judy, Stephen tried to reason with her. He has absolutely no future here, unlike in the capital, where he can put all his skills into practice. Judy was still crying, but eventually she accepted it, and sincerely wanted her son to succeed, and he would find his happiness in a noisy and bright metropolis. Over the next 5 years, William pleased his parents and teachers with success in his studies. The guy was considered one of the best students at the university, passing each session only for excellent marks. William's father was very proud, and his mother began to realize that her husband was right. They had already made grandiose plans for the future of their son, when a terrible tragedy occurred in their lives. Both spouses died in a terrible fire that occurred on their property through the fault of drunken neighbors. They had organized a party in their house and did not keep an eye on the stove. At night, the fire broke out with great force and immediately spread to the roof of Stephen's bathhouse, which stood next to the neighbor's house, separated from it only by a flimsy old fence. When William's father woke up and rushed to put out the fire, it was too late. The bathhouse was almost burnt to the ground, and the flames were starting to reach William's own family home. Trying to knock down the fire, the couple used up all the water on the property and wanted to give up. It was useless, especially since the fire department was in no hurry to come to their remote town. The husband and wife tried to take out of the fire all the most valuable things, the money they had accumulated over many years of hard work, and the documents for the house. At that moment, a heavy floor beam collapsed on them with a terrible rumble. The police, who arrived at the scene of the tragedy together with specialists, stated the accident. William's parents died almost instantly, and there was no one to blame for their deaths. William, who was then in his final year of university, learned of his parents' death and went into shock. He could not eat for days, and during the funeral and wake he could not utter a single word. Grief ate away at his broken heart, and the young man wanted and expected nothing more from life. The death of those closest to him seemed to have finally crippled him, destroying all the joy and purpose on which he had lived for the past few years. A week after the incident, William discovered the first gray hair on his temples. At that moment he finally realized that his youth had come to an end and he had become an adult. On his return to the city, the first thing the young man did was to sell his parents' property. He didn't want to ever return to that town again. Too many difficult events happened there, and William wanted to forever close the door to this part of his past, to settle all matters with the land. The future businessman plunged headfirst back into his studies, trying to ignore the pity in the eyes of his classmates. Now, the main goal of the young man was to finish the university with honors, so he wanted to honor the memory of his mother and father and prove to himself that he could still achieve his goal. Otherwise, all this, both his studies and his move to the capital, was for nothing. The only person who supported him all this time was his girlfriend Vivian. She studied on the same course as William, but the faculty for herself chose art history. The young student was crazy about painting and architecture and even drew very well herself, but she never believed in her own strength enough to switch from studying art to its direct creation. Vivian admired William's stamina and tenacity. Therefore, when he almost broke the story with the death of his relatives, the girl did everything possible so that her beloved did not feel lonely. It was then that William himself first thought about how strong his feelings for Vivian. Having realized that only she alone was for him all this terrible time, support, William made up his mind and made his beloved a proposal. "Will you marry me?" William asked her in the courtyard of the Philharmonic after they had left the concert early. They both found the concert terribly boring. To make his words sound more solemn, the boy got down on one knee in front of his beloved and handed her a small open heart-shaped box covered with red velvet. Inside, on a snow-white silk pad, lay a gold wedding ring with a tiny but star-like diamond. "My God!" Vivian gasped in delight. "How lovely!" William looked at her expectantly and with some tension in his gaze. Vivian was silent for a moment, a little confused by the unexpectedness of the situation, but then she exclaimed happily, "Yes, of course I agree, my love." William relaxed, as if a heavy stone had fallen from his shoulders. In a burst of feelings, he spun in a light dance and then gently kissed his bride. After the wedding, life shone with new colors for William. The first thing he had to do was to find a job that would allow them to rent a good flat and continue the cultural lifestyle to which they had become so accustomed during their time as students. So, having collected his documents and diplomas, the guy went to interview in all more or less decent firms, where they were ready to consider his candidature for the place of economist or financial analyst. After the third interview, he was accepted into a promising young firm that supplied building materials all over the country, and it was with this company that the man subsequently worked until he was offered the job. Vivian did not intend to sit at the young husband on the maintenance, and therefore quite quickly found a place as a staff guide in one of the capital's museums. Yes, it was not as prestigious as the work of a real art historian, but certainly better than running on all fumes waitress in some cheap eatery, while your diploma is dusty on the shelf and does not bring any benefit to society. Young people worked hard and then could disappear all day long somewhere in the theater or at fashion exhibitions. For some time the couple lived, as they call it, for themselves, enjoying each other's feelings in society. This is not very much like the parents of Vivienne, who constantly pressed on their daughter with requests to give birth to their grandchildren. However, the girl was resolute in her intention to first get on her feet, and then already engaged in the expansion of their own family. "I don't like your progressive views," daughter Vivienne's mother Megan said every time she came to visit her daughter and son-in-law. "My father and I have lived together for years. When are we going to get to know your little ones?" "Mum, you don't have to get along with anyone," Vivienne said with a smile. "Not now, not later. William and I are grown-up, independent people, and we can bring up our own children. If we ever need your help, it will definitely be purely one-off," she said. "Don't worry." Vivienne's mother, Cynthia, pressed her lips together and looked at her daughter sadly. How she had never thought she would be faced with her own daughter's reluctance to have children in her old age. If they were adults, they would have babysat long ago. And instead of endless culturalizing, how much more? Cynthia, although a native city dweller, was a member of the so-called old school. She didn't understand why her daughter and her husband didn't live like the normal daughters of her friends. Why they don't give birth to fat newborn babies, whose laughter would drown out the vastness of their large one-bedroom flat from morning to night. "You seem to have forgotten what a woman's true mission is, don't you?" Vivienne asked her mother, looking at her reproachfully. "Mum, don't start, please," Vivienne said, rolling her eyes and begging her. "So I'll remind you. I don't mind," Cynthia went on, as if not noticing her objections. "A woman's mission is to give birth and nurture and pass on all her experience and love to the next generation." Vivienne clamped her hands over her ears to keep from hearing the same thing. Vivienne's mother had been a high school teacher all her life, and Vivienne herself had given birth very late by the standards of her friends, when she was already in her 30s. But when she started talking to her daughter about it, it turned out that she had good reasons, which you see Vivienne herself did not have. "Mama, I promise you, when William and I decide to have a child, you and Papa will be the first to know." Vivienne answered Cynthia tiredly, unable to resist her stubbornness. "How long do I have to wait for you?" the woman said unhappily, and then abruptly turned the conversation to some other subject. Vivienne and William lived childless for several more years before they felt ready to have a son or daughter. And Vivienne was 28 years old at the time. But despite some concerns from doctors about her age, the woman was successful with their future daughter for most of her term. Of course, at first she, as well as all pregnant women, in the first trimester was tormented by a little toxicosis and swelling. But it all passed quite quickly. And then already Vivienne felt just fine. William by then had become a successful top manager in his firm, and the CEO warned him that he sees him as his future successor. Only someone like William would be able to ensure that his company would be able to grow after he retired. William then took the words of his boss with all responsibility and was ready to work 2 or 3 times as much if the company's business required it. At the same time, he was not going to miss the birth of his wife and warned the management about it. The director reacted surprisingly calmly to such an extent he trusted his best employee, so he gave William something like a mini discretionary leave during the birth. Nothing was imminent, and Vivienne was already choosing a name for the baby. Then the news of Megan's death hit her like a thunderclap. That day, William received a call from Vivienne's father telling him that his wife had had a heart attack during the night. William was blown away by the news and for a while didn't know the best way to tell Vivienne about it. He was very worried that such a shock could negatively affect the condition of the child, so at first he even thought not to tell his wife anything before the birth so that she would not worry. However, nothing came out of this idea, because Vivienne quickly realized from his face that something had happened at home. "You're hiding something from me. I can tell," Vivienne said to William as she lay in the labor room, stroking her big, round belly. "You see, by not telling me anything, you're only making it worse." The husband looked at his beloved wife, and in his eyes Vivienne read regret and pain. "What's the matter?" the pregnant woman asked him again, more insistently. "Is it something with my parents? Don't be silent. Tell me." William drew in more air before he said slowly, "Yes, dear Vivienne. You just don't worry. Your mum?" "What? What is it?" Vivienne turned pale, though she realized what was wrong. "She's no longer with us," William said quietly, his head down. For the next few moments, Vivian sat silent and unmoving. The man was beginning to worry whether she had not gone into shock when her spouse suddenly exclaimed several times and with the words, "Mummy, Mummy, darling, why did you go away?" burst into tears in her voice. William tried to soothe her as best he could, but quickly noticed that his wife's sobs had at some point turned into painful cries. Then he called for a nurse, and the nurse, after a quick examination of Vivian and a touch on her belly, declared that she was in labor. "Oh God, it hurts." Vivian cried out once again as she was wheeled on a gurney to the labor ward. William was beside her the whole time and said something encouraging to his wife, though now, after all these years, he couldn't remember exactly what it was. He was not allowed into the operating theater. So William was forced to spend the next few hours in the corridor, sitting on a hard, uncomfortable chair and listening to his wife's incessant cries from behind the door. The businessman remembered that at some point his nerves failed him, and he simply passed out. He came to his senses only after the doctor who delivered Vivian's baby shook him violently by the shoulder. "William, are you all right? Wake up, please," she said. The man struggled to regain consciousness and began rubbing his face with his palms to regain consciousness. When he looked up at the doctor, he immediately realized that something was wrong. Her face was as white as chalk. The hand that had just woken him up was as cold as ice and lifeless. "How's my wife? How's Vivian? Is she doing well?" was the first thing the businessman asked. The doctor and the nurse quickly glanced between themselves. The doctor then informed William. "I'm very sorry, William. We did everything we could for your spouse, but the bleeding was too much. Plus the baby girl was very large. She hit a vital artery in her mother's body when she was born. Vivian didn't stand a chance. Again, my condolences." William felt his chin shake with horror then. Salty tears sprang from his eyes of their own accord. "No," he whispered, and shook his head negatively. "No, it couldn't be. She couldn't be dead, she couldn't." "Catherine, take William to the spare room and sedate him," the doctor ordered the nurse. "We don't need him throwing a tantrum in here." The man himself did not remember how he had ended up in the ward, lying on the hard bed and staring at the ceiling at a single point next to the old chandelier. It was only now beginning to dawn on him that he had lost her. Lost his Vivian, the only woman with whom he felt truly alive and happy. They had been married for almost 8 years. 8. He couldn't even believe it at the time. It seemed to him that they hadn't been married more than a week or two. And now she was gone. God, how William roared like a wounded beast. For what? All that was left in his chest. Every vestige of his soul seemed to have been burnt to the ground. The pain of loss was so intense that he felt it physically, right where his tortured heart was located. Only later did he remember that he had a child. "A girl, my daughter. What's wrong with her?" William asked the silence surrounding him. Jumping out of bed, the man rushed to the doctor's office and asked the surgeon who delivered his wife the same question. "Calm down, please sit down," the doctor pointed him to a chair. When William reluctantly complied, the woman continued. "Your daughter is fine. She's in a postpartum pod right now. This is perfectly normal for her situation." The businessman looked at her as if his future depended on her words. "Given that her mother has died, the baby will have to be fed exclusively by artificial feeding. So I advise you to look into the matter as soon as possible." The doctor looked at William a little harshly, but when she saw that he was genuinely worried about the fate of his child and at the same time worried about the tragic death of his wife, she softened. "Look, I understand what you're going through, honestly, but you're not the first, and, unfortunately, not the last man whose wife dies in childbirth. It happens, and there's nothing we can do about it." The doctor leaned closer to the businessman and continued. "The only thing you need to think about now, what you need to concentrate on as much as possible, is your little girl in the neonatal box. Your little girl is a fighter. She's tough. So be a role model for her. Be strong, confident in your own success. Believe me, children read all this as no worse than adults. Besides, it will help you get closer. What is incredibly important to a child who lost his mother in the first few hours of life." William nodded slowly then, and swallowed with difficulty the huge lump in his throat. If all of what the doctor was saying was true, then he would be the best father in the world to his daughter. When he was allowed to pick up his daughter, William almost cried when he saw the tiny baby girl in the pink warm envelope. The same day he gave the girl the name Amanda, which means beloved in Hebrew. For the next 17 years, the businessman did everything possible for his daughter so that she would never stop feeling his love and support. Although at first it was very difficult for a single father, but he still managed to survive this difficult period. Despite the constant busyness, William still tried to be close to his child at the first opportunity. Not a single birthday or New Year's Day Amanda never spent alone or surrounded by only nannies and children from kindergarten. When her daughter at the age of 4 seriously took up rhythmic gymnastics, her father was only amazed at the willpower and stamina of his beloved little girl. The girl's grandfather, Sebastian, in the early years of great help his son-in-law, took his granddaughter to the section, and later into competitions. Amanda adored her grandfather and considered him her second best friend on earth after her father. Unfortunately, Sebastian was already quite old at that time and, like his late wife, had heart problems. When the granddaughter was 9 years old, her grandfather passed away. The cause of the man's death was a massive stroke, which immediately gave a fatal complication to his heart. Amanda cried very long and hard at the time. She could not imagine life without her beloved grandfather. So William was forced to take an unscheduled leave of absence from his firm for an indefinite period of time. For the next 2 weeks, he never left his daughter's side, keeping her entertained and distracted until the grief of the little child gradually subsided. In time, Amanda returned to her daily routine and constant training, and this was the salvation that helped her to finally calm down and become stronger in spirit. "I will dedicate every victory I win to my grandfather," Amanda promised her father. "I believe that he, Mom, and Grandma are all watching over me from heaven and would really like to see me succeed in sport." "Of course, darling," the business smiled affectionately, stroking his daughter's soft light brown hair. "You know, you're an incredibly wise girl. I'm really glad you were able to let go of Grandpa and continue to enjoy life." "I love you, Daddy," Amanda replied shortly and hugged her father tightly around the neck. "William, are you okay? Can you hear me?" The businessman was called out by his driver as they approached the office, bringing the man out of his reverie. "Ha, what?" "Yes, of course, Kevin, you were saying something." William was not immediately able to return to reality. The driver, Kevin, looked at him carefully in the rear-view mirror but said nothing. He had often noticed how his boss was absorbed in his thoughts while driving, so he was used to it. "Yes," I said. "Human Resources just called and said they were able to find you a new receptionist," Kevin said as he carefully parked the car. "They want you to take a look at her. They say she's very competent, knows what she's doing. Even worked for your competitors some time ago, but she left them because she wasn't satisfied with her salary." "That's right," William chuckled. Well, let's see who this lady is. I hope she at least knows how to make good coffee." A quarter of an hour later, he received in his office a tall, long-legged beauty in her 30s, who gave him her graceful, thin hand. The woman introduced herself as Cynthia and told the businessman about her extensive experience in secretarial work. The director of the company noted to himself with satisfaction that the personnel officers had not lied to him. This sultry brunette with plump lips and a slim waist really held her dignity and could present herself as if she were a real professional. And her chic appearance was just the cherry on the cake, quite in keeping with the requirements of such a solid company as they were. "I think we'll work well together," Cynthia Williams said. "Congratulations, you've been hired. Of course, you'll have to go through a probationary period first, but I don't think you'll have any problems with that." Cynthia gave him a charming smile, then elegantly flicked a strand of her dark, bitter coffee-colored hair over her shoulder. "Thank you, William," she said. "I'm sure I'll enjoy working for your company, too. I can feel the positive energy in the place." The woman rose easily from her chair, and at that moment the businessman saw a small, but very racy part of her tanned cleavage. Cynthia smiled again, while William involuntarily threw himself into a fever, and for a few moments he even found it difficult to breathe. Since the death of his beloved spouse Vivian, the businessman had never remarried. Moreover, he had not been able to find a worthy companion with whom he could spend his time carefree and to whom he could open his soul as easily as he had once done with his wife. and he was just as worried about Amanda. How would the girl feel about having another woman in his life? Would she get along with a hypothetical stepmother? Or would the relationship between them be in constant tension? All these fears tormented William and did not give him the opportunity to really relax in the company of a pleasant woman. Later, he gave up these thoughts, referring to his age and constant business busyness. Moll, who would marry him so busy? And there stood before him this stunning Cynthia, whose smile could drive any sensible man crazy with a snap of her fingers. The businessman's heart beat faster. He had only to imagine that he could marry such a beautiful person. However, William hurried to put such thoughts out of his mind. He did not want to become a bad illustration of the famous joke about the boss and his faithful secretary mistress. Gathering all his composure, William politely said goodbye to the young woman, and she sent him a promising smile in return, after which she replied in a quiet voice. "I look forward to my first day of work," she said. "Good day, William." Cynthia said this and slipped through the open door of his office as gracefully as she had entered. The businessman leaned back in his chair with relief and took a few deep breaths. And faced with such a situation, he certainly hadn't expected even from himself such a reaction. Was it the first time in all these years that a real hot feeling flared up in his soul? Is this the autumn of love, which so many famous poets have sung in their verses so many times? Be that as it may, I must look at this Cynthia first, William thought to himself. It's not right at my age to rush headlong into something like this. I should wait a little longer. Having made up his mind, the man returned to work with difficulty and spent the rest of the day completing the final accounts. However, no matter how hard he tried, he could not get out of his mind the beautiful secretary, with whom he was now to work side by side. What an old fool, William scolded himself. God forbid you should fall in love in your old age. What are you going to do with all those feelings? The man shook his head, reproaching himself for his own heartfelt intemperance. He could only calm himself when he had washed his face with cold water for several long minutes. At the same time, Cynthia was leaving the building with a satisfied smile on her face and getting into a taxi, giving the taxi driver the address. The woman leaned against the car window and thought happily to herself. Bingo. You've got me, my good man. Now I'll get everything out of you. It's a sin to miss such a big fish. It's time for me to get my rightful piece of happiness with a millionaire. I'll finish one thing first, and then I'll get right on to you, William. Turn it up, she said to the driver, and he turned the radio knob. The cabin filled with some pop tune in which the singer happily boasted of her wealth and happiness in private jets, diamonds, and rich customers. In fact, Cynthia was not too fond of music, but this song reflected her gambling moods right now in the best possible way. A couple of weeks after that, William's life was sharply divided into before and after. The businessman, as usual, dropped off his daughter Amanda for a workout, himself going to the office. Amanda, being a recent graduate, decided to finally connect her life with rhythmic gymnastics. That's why she wanted to perform at regional competitions first, and then start preparing to enter the Institute of Physical Education. Nothing that day did not foreshadow the terrible misfortune that would soon burst into William's life. Like a terrible storm, he was working in his office as usual, when suddenly his mobile phone rang. Bringing the screen up to his face, the man was surprised to see that it was his daughter calling. Strange, the businessman thought to himself. Amanda never calls during training. Something must have happened. Feeling a slight unease in his soul, William answered the phone. Hello, Hello, William, an unfamiliar female voice asked him. Yes, he answered in a trembling voice. Why are you calling from my daughter's phone? Who are you? There was a second pause on the other end of the line, and then the same voice said, My name is Mrs. Helen. I'm your daughter Amanda's coach. Your little girl just fainted right during practice. I don't know what happened to her, but an ambulance is taking her away right now. You better come to the hospital. She dictated the address. William felt the ground slipping away from under his feet, his eyes darkening sharply. He wrote down the address of the hospital, and after drinking a large glass of water and a sedative, he drove there. When he explained at the emergency room who he was and who he had come to see, he was immediately taken to the doctor who had dealt with Amanda's condition since her admission. As he looked at the doctor, businessman William noted with annoyance that the expression on his face was very worried. "Explain to me what is wrong with my Amanda," he asked as they entered his office. The doctor hesitated for a moment, a little unsure how to begin. Then he asked with a sigh, "Tell me, have you ever noticed any suspicious symptoms in your daughter? Sudden hematomas, weakness, high body temperature for no particular reason?" The businessman shook his head confusedly. "No, never. I have a daughter who is an athlete. Sure, she gets bruises a lot, but none of the things you just mentioned. Anyway, Amanda has never complained about anything. You see, I work a lot, although I try to be home more often, but it's not always possible." The doctor twiddled his pen thoughtfully before answering. "I see. In that case, I have some bad news for you." William tensed, unable to even guess what the doctor was going to tell him. "My God, what's wrong with my daughter?" he asked quietly. "It is suspected that Amanda has acute leukemia. The examination showed that she has a monstrously high level of certain enzymes responsible for blood clotting. Unfortunately, such a disease can manifest itself in a person at almost any age. And teenagers who are actively engaged in physical activities, alas, are also at risk." William lowered his eyes, unable to look at the doctor. It had not yet fully dawned on him that his daughter was in mortal danger. Glancing down at his lap, the businessman noted with surprise how his hands were shaking with a fine tremor. It seemed to him that he was in some terrible nightmare from which there was only one way out to wake up. "Tell me, is there anything I can do to help her?" The businessman asked the doctor in a slumped voice. His own voice seemed alien to him, as if he was seeing and hearing himself from the outside, as if in a film. The doctor looked at him carefully and answered with a sigh. "Yes, but we don't have much time," the doctor continued. "We will still do further examinations. So for now, the girl will remain under our care. You can have your blood analyzed. If you have a complete match, then we can perform a bone marrow transplant from you to your daughter. It's the only way to beat the disease completely." A tiny flicker of hope flashed in businessman William's eyes at the doctor's words. "Of course, doctor, I'd do anything, even give up my whole self for spare parts, just to make my little girl well." "Good," he nodded. "Then let's go in. You need to be prepared." William stopped the doctor here, touching his arm lightly. "Excuse me, can I see Amanda? I need to talk to my daughter, explain everything to her. She must be so terrified right now." The doctor's voice sounded soft as he answered. "Don't worry, she already knows everything. Your girl is a real fighter." She took the news so calmly. The doctor looked at the businessman with slight envy. "You know, if I had a daughter like that, I would be incredibly proud of her. Such resilience and will to live." William nodded absently. "Yes, I have her like that. You're not the first person to say that to me." A few hours later, when all the necessary tests had been carried out, the doctor left the office, looking glumly at the results. From his face, the businessman realized that the doctor was very unhappy about something. "Doctor, how about it? Can I become a donor for Amanda?" The doctor slowly tore his gaze away from the papers. His eyes were full of regret and sadness. "To my great regret, William, you are not a match." The world at that moment instantly lost all its colors in the eyes of the businessman. William felt his hands trembling sharply, so he slowly sat down on the edge of the chair in the hall. "Why?" was all he could ask. "It happens often," the doctor answered as calmly as possible. "Don't get upset before the time. It just needs a closer relative with similar genetic material." "Tell me, does your daughter have brothers and sisters?" the doctor asked. Maybe the girl's mother could also try to donate her blood. Depressed millionaire William could hardly answer. "Her mother died many years ago in childbirth. I am the only one she has left. Amanda has no brothers and sisters." The doctor shook his lips, taking a seat next to the businessman. "Then you have only one option left to urgently find a donor. I will, of course, send a request through my channels, but the chance that they will be able to find one so quickly is very slim. Are you trying to find any other relatives?" "Amanda, preferably on her mother's side." Even the most distant relatives might happen to have a phenotype that matches ours. William listened to the doctor while his head was in a fog. Finally, turning to the doctor, he looked at him with eyes full of mute pleading. "Can I still see Amanda? Please." "Of course, let's go," the doctor responded instantly, and led the man to a separate room where his daughter had been transferred at William's request after the first examination and all the necessary care. "Daddy," Amanda exclaimed, and her father rushed to her, holding her tightly in his arms. "Amanda, honey, how are you?" asked the businessman. Tears were already glistening in his eyes. Amanda looked very pale, but she was doing well. When she spoke, her voice sounded almost cheerful. "Normal, considering what happened to me. Dad, how is this possible? Why did this disease choose me?" There was no fear in Amanda's eyes, but there was a huge question in them, and a sense of injustice. "What about my competitions, my training?" The girl tried to talk about the most everyday things, obviously trying to push away the worst thoughts. William smiled through his daughter's tears and stroked her face as gently as if she were made of crystal. "I'm afraid we'll have to say goodbye to that for a while," he said slowly. "Your health is the most important thing now." After a little silence, the businessman decided to be honest with his daughter. "Amanda," Williams said in a sad voice, "unfortunately, I can't be your donor. My blood is not suitable for you, but I will definitely solve this issue. I will find a donor, I promise you." When Amanda learnt that her last hope was gone like smoke, she couldn't hold back her own tears. "How much, Dad?" she asked. "How much do the doctors give me?" The man sighed heavily before answering. The girl realized that she didn't have long to live. "I see," Amanda said slowly. "It turns out that this might be our last meeting." The girl looked at her father so piercingly that the businessman's heart squeezed. "No, of course not," William tried to reassure her. "I will definitely come to see you again. I'll just try to find someone whose blood is exactly the right match for you. I'll save you, daughter, I swear." Amanda slowly stroked her father's cheek. "Promise me you won't give up, even if I'm not in your life. You absolutely must live and remember me." "Then I'll be calm up there." The girl raised her eyes to the ceiling, referring to the sky. "Don't say such things to me," William exclaimed in despair. "You will live, do you hear? You will live." He began to cover Amanda's hand with kisses, and then assured her that he would come to visit her in a few days. His daughter also kissed her father on the cheek, after which the businessman handed her over to the care of the doctors and left the hospital as if he had just been run over by a train. A month. Only a month was left for his daughter, because the disease came upon her with terrible force. The doctor said the leukemia outbreak could have been triggered by extreme stress on the eve of the competition. For the first time in his life, William regretted giving his daughter to rhythmic gymnastics. The man sank down on the cold stone steps leading to the medical center and wrapped his arms around his head in despair. What was he going to do now? Where to get that damned donor when Amanda's mother's entire family had been dead for a long time, and he had never heard from any other relative? At that moment, he saw out of the corner of his eye a woman stop in front of him. Or rather, he didn't even see all of her, just her feet, shod in summer open sandals. A long skirt of light material flowed around her legs, and William slowly raised his worry-weary face to her. "Who are you?" he asked, looking up at the street fortune teller smiling at him as she strolled leisurely through the city streets at that hour. "I am Elizabeth," the fortune teller replied solemnly and held out her hand to him. "I see that you need help, my dear. Let me read your hand. Don't worry, your hand. Don't worry, I won't charge you any money. I see when people are genuinely worried about their misfortune, and when they ask for fortune telling for fun." The most interesting thing was that this Elizabeth did not look like some gypsy from a traveling tailor. She was a well-dressed young woman of about 25, with long blonde hair and a high ponytail and a light blue denim jacket thrown carelessly over her white, aristocratic shoulders. Her blue eyes looked at William with such genuine sympathy and warmth that he couldn't bear to send her away. "I don't think you can help me," the businessman replied tiredly. "I don't think anyone will be able to find the answer to the question that now occupies me more than anything else in the world." The fortune teller's eyebrows rose in amazement. do not believe in the power of my gift? Or do you think that because I don't look like a gypsy, I'm of no use to you? I have an Irish gypsy grandmother, by the way. That's why she's white-skinned. We all came from Egyptian coloring. William looked at the girl curiously. I've never heard of such a thing, he said, and rose slowly to his feet. Well, Elizabeth, if you are so sure, then please. The man held out his hand to the fortune teller, and she instantly grasped it, scrutinizing the tiny lines on his palm and fingers. All the while, Elizabeth twirled his hand back and forth and nodded affirmatively, as if she had already figured it all out and was looking for the latest confirmation of her amazing discovery. It's clear, she said at last, and looked at the rich man with sincere sympathy. Do you have someone in your bloodline who is ill? Very close, a daughter or a sister. I think it's the daughter. You want to help her, but you don't know how. Fate says you need to find someone else. Then you can save her. William, who had been standing all this time listening to the fortune teller with undisguised amazement, suddenly frowned sharply. What do you mean, find another? What does it all mean? Elizabeth took another quick glance at his palm and nodded affirmatively. That's right. There can be no doubt. The prophecy says so. William pulled his palms from her hands, muttering disappointedly. What is this nonsense? I almost fell for it. Jesus. Elizabeth, realizing that the businessman didn't believe her, only shrugged her shoulders. It's up to you. I told you the whole truth as it is. This is the salvation of your daughter. If you let it go, don't speak ill of me, because I warned you. With these words, Elizabeth strode away with dignity towards the park, leaving the bewildered and shocked rich man alone with his thoughts. To find another. What can that mean? Meanwhile, the businessman puzzled. Although he did not believe in the predictions of this strange blonde, but in his gut he felt that there was something important in this phrase. Something that would help him find a way out of the terrible situation with Amanda. Elizabeth was on her way home when she witnessed a horrifying scene. As she walked across the bridge, the fortune teller saw a young girl of about 17 or 18 years of age flying over the railing. The intentions were more than easily guessed. So Elizabeth rushed towards her and only by a miracle managed to grab her shoulder, pulling her towards her. Are you out of your mind? She shouted at the girl when she was already sitting on the pavement, holding her trembling heart. Have you had enough of life? And if so, shouted back the unhappy girl, and large tears came to her eyes. If I have nothing to live for and nowhere else to live, what am I to do? Collect alms. Elizabeth, the street fortune teller, knelt down beside the girl. Look, I understand you've had an accident. Something really bad, I guess. You just decided to jump off a bridge into the river. But only the most horrible and unfair things in the world shouldn't make you do something so stupid, you know? Life is the most important, the most precious thing we have. How can you just try to walk away from it? The young stranger looked at the fortune teller, and her face showed hopelessness and anguish. Deceived, she tried to explain. So deceived that I don't know how to go on living or what to do. Elizabeth looked at her doubtfully. A boyfriend? What a guy. The stranger waved her away. She tried to get to her feet, but she was still a little shaky from the shock. My aunt. She robbed me of my flat by deceit. She changed the locks. I didn't even have time to get my things before she threw me out of there like a kitten. The girl covered her face with her hands and wept bitterly. Elizabeth felt sorry for this young fool who was ready to give up her life for some miserable square meters. Then the fortune teller suggested to her, You know what? Let's go to my place now. I'll give you hot tea, and we'll eat something at the same time. And you'll tell me everything in detail, who and how deceived you. Maybe I'll be able to help you in some way. The girl looked at her with red, tear-stained eyes and nodded gratefully. Thank you. And please forgive me. I didn't mean to scare anyone. It's just my desperation. Don't worry. I'm not vindictive. The fortune teller smirked and extended her hand to introduce herself. My name is Elizabeth. What's yours? Kimberly, the girl nodded, answering the handshake. What a beautiful name you have. Is it something European? It's Greek, the fortune teller explained. It's just rare nowadays. My grandmother chose it for me. She hoped that I would make fewer mistakes in my life than my mother. The young woman explained to Kimberly that the name Elizabeth translated from ancient Greek is pure, pure, and the fortune teller's mother had been known for her excessive love of men and promiscuous relationships, for which she'd eventually paid the price. Grandmother said one of her admirers had sent her to the grave, Elizabeth said, as they put the kettle on and poured the flavorful shortbread into a saucer. By then they had arrived at the fortune teller's small flat. What a horror. Kimberly shook her hands. How did you survive that? The woman shrugged and threw her jacket on the old plush sofa. I don't know. I was only 5. My grandmother brought me up. She'd taken care of me all the time before that, while my mum was getting on with her life. And when all this happened, she took me away from the Tabor and moved here, to the city. We've lived together ever since. She taught me her skills, and I was the best domestic helper for her. It's just a pity she didn't live to see my high school graduation. My grandmother made me such a dress that all my classmates were green with envy the whole evening. Losing a mum is the greatest tragedy in a person's life, Kimberly said thoughtfully, then added, I lost mine too. Just recently. Just 4 months ago. I'm sorry, the fortune teller lowered her eyes. What happened? I'm sorry if I'm prying. You promised you'd tell me what happened to you, remember? Kimberly looked sadly at her new friend. On the accident. Mum was coming home from work and crossing the road at a green light. At that moment, some car just oversteered. The police said it had a brake failure or something. Anyway, Mum had been hit by a car. Elizabeth looked at her sympathetically. And then her sister turned up, my aunt. The girl went on. I was just finishing school and I wanted to go to school to study history. It all came upon me so suddenly and terribly. My mum's death, not knowing what to do next. Kimberly sighed heavily before continuing. It was the first time she ever showed up at a funeral. She was all beautiful and caring, helped with the wake. But then when all the guests left, it was like she'd been replaced. Cold, calculating bitch. That's what she turned out to be. Yes, I can see that you have a complicated relationship with that Aunt Elizabeth said, astonished. That's an understatement, Kimberly said, wiping away tears of anger with her fist. All she wanted was Mum's flat. That's all. She complained to me that I was the only one living in a 2-bedroom like this, and she was the one who had to live in rented flats. Since she's a sister, she's entitled to a share of Mum's property. I tried to explain to her that there was no mention of her in the will, but this woman was just incredibly stubborn. The fortune teller listened without interrupting, giving the girl a chance to talk. In the end, Kimberly continued, the aunt suggested that we split the flat so that none of us would be offended. I was a little upset, but then I felt sorry for her. She and Mum had a really bad relationship all her life. I don't know what caused it, but it must have been something serious. I don't think they'd fight over something like that. Kimberly took a big sip of tea and finished her sad story. Anyway, I agreed to the exchange, but she brought her lawyer and I couldn't even read what I was signing. It was my fault, of course, Kimberly said through her tears. I should have insisted that they give me time to read the documents. But it turned out there was no exchange, and I'd signed her, that aunt, a deed of gift to my mum's flat. Here the girl again could not contain her feelings and cried to tears. How stupid I am. The girl scolded herself. How could I believe her? You didn't know she would want to do such a mean thing to you, Elizabeth tried to comfort her. It was always the last thing you expected from the people closest to you. But Kimberly only shook her head in denial. I should have sensed it, should have known that if she was acting so strangely and persistently, she must be up to something. But I fell for it like a stupid chicken. The girl told me that when she came back the next day from the preparatory course for the institute, she couldn't get to her house. She pounded her hands on the door for a long time, until her aunt opened the door and announced to everyone that the flat now belonged to her. And she'd just been cleverly deceived. Can you imagine how I feel? She asked the fortune teller. She told me that she had changed the locks, and now there was nothing in the house that belonged to me. And when I asked her where I should go now, do you know what she told me? Elizabeth looked at the girl curiously. She said that I could try to get into the institute from the first time and immediately to the full-time department, on a budget. Then, she said I would have a room in the dormitory and a place to live. The young fortune teller was amazed at the cynicism of this horrible woman. Well, don't worry, we'll think of something, she patted the girl on the shoulder. Until then, you can stay with me as long as you want. You're a good girl, Kimberly said gratefully. I can see you're not lying about my aunt and my situation. Any of us could be in that situation. If you only knew what I see when I read people's hands or cards, Elizabeth said meaningfully and shook her head. A tiny flicker of hope appeared in Kimberly's eyes at that moment. Thank you so much, she said fervently. I'll definitely find a job. You'll see. I'll help you cleaning, cooking. In response, Elizabeth advised her not to worry and promised her that she would find a way to teach her aunt a lesson and get Kimberly her rightful flat back. For the next couple of weeks, Kimberly lived in Elizabeth's tiny flat and helped her around the house. While the young fortune teller made a living for herself and her by entertaining passersby in the park at the weekend fair, as well as doing personal card readings and making personalized astrological forecasts and horoscopes, which Elizabeth assured her were always the most lucrative. Kimberly also wasted no time and went on all sorts of job interviews. Still, after the shocking story with her aunt and the flat, she could not properly prepare for the entrance exams. So she decided to try to find at least some work, so as not to hang on Elizabeth's neck, and at the same time to get the experience she needed, without which she did not want to take in the little decent companies. At the same time, William was trying to hold on with his life. He was constantly looking for a suitable donor for his daughter, but so far all was to no avail. As before, the businessman visited Amanda in the hospital, but each time he became more and more convinced that she had very little time left. Despite the coordinated, competent actions of doctors, as well as the necessary drugs in such a situation, the girl still needed an urgent operation. Everyone, including Amanda, understood this perfectly well and did not give up hope of finding her donor at last. Remembering the fortune teller's strange prediction, William could not figure out its basic meaning. However, William still listened to Elizabeth's words about bloodlines and hired the best detectives in the city to try to find any of his late wife's distant relatives. You need to calm down, William, Cynthia said affectionately, bringing the man a cup of coffee with dark bitter chocolate on a platter, the businessman's favorite treat for relieving the worst of his stress. I am sure that sooner or later you will achieve your goal, and Amanda will definitely recover. Every time the secretary looked at her boss with such a languid look that he had to look away. And he, of course, still liked this gorgeous woman very much. And she didn't seem to mind trying to take their relationship to the next level. Except that William wasn't really interested in that right now. His first priority, as he'd always said, was his daughter. Seeing that she was failing to attract the wealthy man, Cynthia bit her lip, while giving the friendliest smile she could muster in front of everyone. Damn that Amanda of his, the woman said angrily to herself. She had to be sick right now when things were just starting to work out between him and me. She could have waited a year until her father and I were married. She could have switched donors for all I care. No one's stopping me. I'd get his entire fortune, and I'd find a way to make good use of his money. Cynthia hatched similarly devious plans. She continued to work in William's company, while trying to conquer this impregnable fortress. On a future day, as William was scrutinizing the terms of an upcoming deal, his phone suddenly began to ring with a melodious trill. When the man picked up the receiver, it turned out to be one of the detectives he had sent to search for Vivian's relatives. Well, is there any news? The businessman asked hopefully. Yes and no, the detective answered him evasively. You see, it turned out that Vivian had no relatives. William's heart immediately dropped down into the darkest abyss. Are you sure? Maybe you didn't look hard enough. After all, her family was once considered quite famous. No siblings? And there was a deep sigh at the other end of the phone. Believe me, William, we have checked all the archives of the town and village where your wife was born, and there's absolutely nothing. However, as I said, we still managed to find something interesting. The businessman immediately concentrated as much as possible on the detective's voice. What is it? Tell me. You intrigue me. When we checked the archives of the hospital where your wife gave birth, we found one interesting detail, The detective began cautiously. "Tell me, William, were you aware that Vivienne had given birth to twins?" "What? I can't believe my ears," exclaimed the businessman. "Do you realize what you're saying? What twins? My wife never mentioned to me or being pregnant a second time." A hunch slowly began to dawn on the rich man, and it was confirmed by the detective himself. "That's why I'm asking, because it's the same single birth," he said slowly. "One of the 2 medical reports I found says that your wife gave birth to twin girls." William rubbed his forehead tensely. He had no idea what was going on. "But the doctor never told us anything like that." "I don't see how that's possible. Did you have an ultrasound scan?" the detective asked. "Yes, but can you imagine what it was like at that time? The only machine in the whole city, and that one malfunctioned every once in a while. Unless there was some mistake and the doctor who performed the ultrasound just didn't see the second child. But that still doesn't change the fact that I never knew anything about a second daughter." "Where is she then?" William asked. The detective was silent for a moment, obviously considering how best to say the next piece of news. "That's where we come to the interesting part. There was another woman in labor at the same time as your wife that day, the daughter of the same midwife who delivered Vivienne's baby. And according to the documents, the midwife's granddaughter died, suffocated, entangled in the umbilical cord." "Jesus," William said. "But what has that got to do with me?" "I'm afraid it has everything to do with me," William continued, the detective. "As I was saying, the main oddity was that there were originally 2 of each medical report. That is, both your wife's and the midwife's daughters. And while in Vivienne's case, one of them says that one of her twins died at birth, the midwife's daughter's file says the exact opposite. They gave her my little girl," William finally realized. "I'm afraid so," the detective replied sadly. "We found both reports in the chief doctor's safe. Don't ask us how we did it. We won't tell you anyway," the detective returned with professional humor. "The fact is, the midwife's daughter never found out. She thought she had given birth to her baby. Soon afterwards, they all went to live together, the woman, the daughter, and their grandmother somewhere up north. And that's where their trail is completely lost." "So you don't know where my daughter is now?" William asked quietly. "Unfortunately, that's all we've been able to find out," the detective replied. "But still, you know now that there is another William somewhere. If you are lucky enough to find her." How am I going to find her?" William exclaimed in despair. "I was counting on you," he snapped at the detective. "I don't have any more time. Amanda has no more time, she's dying." It took the businessman a second to pull himself together and apologize to the detective, thanking him for his work. William hung up the phone and slowly lowered himself into his desk chair. Okay, so he had been duped in the most brazen way possible by giving away only one infant of the twins. Vivienne's medical records had been completely fabricated. And it seems that even the midwife herself didn't know that Vivienne was having twins. When it all happened and his wife was gone, the midwife thought it would be all right if she gave her daughter one of the twins, so that the young woman, God forbid, wouldn't go mad with grief when she learned of her own baby girl's death. William felt absolutely devastated and broken, and his last hope had died before it could take shape. Now the businessman knew only one thing: if he lost Amanda, he would lose all incentive for further life and work. His daughter was everything to him, and he certainly didn't want to live in a world where she was gone. 3 days later, Elizabeth brought Kimberly a newspaper with free classifieds. "I grabbed this on the way, in case you find something suitable," the fortune teller suggested, seeing how desperately the girl was suffering without a job. Everywhere Kimberly went, she was offered to take some paid courses or was turned back, referring to the lack of experience of the yesterday's schoolgirl. Kimberly became frustrated and wanted to try to take out a loan from the bank to get some training so that she could get a job. When Elizabeth was able to convince her that all the loans and courses were nothing more than an elaborate ruse paid for by enthusiasts like Kimberly herself. "You should read the paper," she urged the girl who had become her best friend. "There are always jobs for ordinary people in the paper, and you might find something to your liking." The girl followed the fortune teller's advice and carefully studied the thin magazine. After an agonizing choice between a dishwasher and a cleaner, Kimberly chose the latter. And rightly so, Elizabeth encouraged her. Of course, it's not the most prestigious profession, Kimberly agreed, but it's a very good, well-known firm, and they promise a good salary, not unlike other places. It's a good reason to try for an interview. Kimberly said yes with a sigh. No, it wasn't a career she'd ever dreamed of, but on the other hand, she had to start somewhere. When she arrived at the given address, she found a large, bright office of the construction company, clean and beautiful inside. However, when she went up to the 5th floor to go to the director of the company, Kimberly froze like a stumbling block, unable to utter a single word. The girl turned as pale as a sheet. Her only wish at that moment was to fall through the ground, but it was too late. Cynthia had seen her and now stood blocking Kimberly's path to the principal's office with her arms locked at her sides. "What are you doing here, bitch?" hissed the secretary. Kimberly stared at her, her eyes fixed on her with an angry but proud gaze. "I'm here to apply for a job." "Let me through," she said, and tried to get past Cynthia. But she grabbed the girl roughly by the shoulders. "Are you applying for a job as a cleaner?" Oh my God. And here I was, wondering what brought you here. The secretary's look at that moment reminded me of a snake preparing for a fatal leap. "No, my dear, not today." Cynthia pushed Kimberly to the other end of the corridor. "I don't want you here. I don't want it to turn out by accident that you're related to me. It'd be a shame that would never be cleaned up." Cynthia looked at the young girl with all the anger and hatred she had in her soul at that moment. When William heard the strange shouting and fussing outside the door, he decided to go out and see for himself what was going on. "Cynthia, what's going on? Did the girl show up for her interview or not? Human Resources is calling, saying they've lost her." Cynthia wanted to explain something to him, but saw the supervisor's face change as he looked at her niece. "William, what's wrong with you?" the secretary asked cautiously, and the ugly smile instantly flew off her face. "The tests were good," the businessman said. The girl looked at him with uncomprehending eyes. She looked from William to Cynthia and back again. Cynthia turned to her niece, and Kimberly could have sworn she saw a hellfire of rage in her eyes. "Get out of here. Now," Cynthia ordered her. William, however, extended his hand towards the girl and shook his head. "No, let her stay. Please, girl. I don't know your name. Give me a few minutes, I beg of you." Kimberly didn't know what to do, but there was such desperation written on the man's face that the yesterday's schoolgirl agreed. "All right," she said simply and followed William. He was in a state of complete shock. The exact copy of his daughter was standing in front of him. Could it be true? Was this girl really his lost twin daughter, Amanda? If so, he was left with one last chance to save his child. "Please, let's do a DNA test," William pleaded with her in her office. "My daughter is about to die. The doctors have already done everything they can. If it turns out that you and my girl are sisters, it could literally save a life." Kimberly doubted that could really happen. But the story the businessman had told her about himself and his daughter, and about the results of the investigation, still convinced the girl to try to trust him. After all, if it really is true and Amanda is her sister, then she will have another family. Having consented to the tests and analyses, Kimberly and William went straight to the hospital. When the girl's blood was drawn to run all the necessary tests, the man took her to his daughter's room. Amanda, of course, was as shocked as her father. However, Kimberly was very positive about Kimberly's appearance. She greeted the girl in a friendly manner and then told her, "There is no such coincidence in nature. You can see that you and I look exactly alike." "You must be my lost sister," Amanda said. "Daddy told me everything." Kimberly felt like she was in a fantasy film. There was no doubt in her mind that she and Amanda were alike, but she'd never felt like she had a sister, or even a twin. And twins are supposed to be able to sense these things even from a distance. "Congratulations. The test confirmed your relationship 100%. William smiled happily as the doctor announced to the girls, "If Kimberly is ready, we can start the preparation process for the operation." It was all so sudden and rapid for the young girl. "Of course, let's get started," was all she could manage to nod. The preparations went well, and soon Amanda received a bone marrow transplant and a blood transfusion from her own sister. After that, the girl recovered almost immediately, and Kimberly, who was lying in the ward with her, still couldn't believe that she had found both a sister and a father at the same time. In the hustle and bustle of events, Kimberly didn't immediately remember that she wanted to talk to William. When she felt better, she asked to spend a few minutes with her father and warned him about Cynthia. "Don't believe that woman, please," she said in a voice weak from the operation. "She is not as nice and kind as she wants to appear." In general terms, the girl told her newfound father about the story of her flat and the fact that she was now living with the fortune teller Elizabeth. Hearing about the latter, William immediately remembered her prophecy. Find another god, that's what it meant. She was talking about Amanda's sister. He hadn't realized it at the time. When he found out about his secretary's deception, the businessman was furious at her behavior. The very next day, he fired the bastard and threatened her with jail if she didn't sign the flat back over to Kimberly. Cynthia wanted to be rich, and even more wanted to stay free, so she gave the flat back to her niece and left town for good. Kimberly had finally recovered. She was happy to know that she could go home now. She was going to go to college, as she wanted to, and promised her father to visit her and Amanda as soon as possible. The girls had no doubt that they would become friends, so in this plan, businessman William was calm and very happy for them. William had already invited Elizabeth to his workplace as a thank you for helping his lost daughter. He made the woman his personal astrologer. The young woman was very happy that her prophecies came true, saving the life of an entire family. Gradually, the first timid feelings were born between her and William. Their relationship from a working relationship smoothly turned into a romantic one. The man, having talked to Elizabeth closer, realized that she could become for him a new breath of life and create for him that missing home comfort, which he so dreamed of. Soon he and Elizabeth were married. The wedding was very beautiful and left the guests with many fond memories. Now they all live together in the millionaire's house and enjoy every day, which gives them the opportunity to enjoy life again and get to know each other from new sides. From lack of money, Isabella got a job as a maid to a millionaire widower. And when she saw her own face in the photo T4. Isabella Swan sat in the city park and cried bitterly. For the first time in her life, she was in a situation from which she saw no way out. After all, it seemed that not so long ago the girl was absolutely happy and dreamed of how soon she would get married and together with her beloved husband could create a real family. Unfortunately, Isabella's dreams were not destined to come true. On the contrary, the fairy tale quickly turned into a real nightmare for the young modest girl. Now, finding herself alone with the harsh reality, Bella was not only left completely alone without any support help, but could not even remotely imagine what awaits her in the foreseeable future. And it all started a few months ago when Isabella, having celebrated with her best friend her 23rd birthday, was returning home late at night from a nice cafe, recently opened in the neighborhood where Bella lived. Anne, a friend of the girl, offered to call a taxi for her, but Bella refused. They had already spent a lot of money in that fancy place. Isabella was strict about that. She tried to save on such things, allowing herself to arrange even such small holidays only on special occasions. "Bella, let me call you a car after all," Anne insisted. "Look at the clock, it's 11 o'clock. It's dangerous to walk in your neighborhood at this hour." "Don't," she said with a smile. "I've lived here for so many years, every dog knows me. What could happen here? And it's not that far. It's only a couple of blocks. If you're after money, I'll pay for your trip myself." "You're stubborn," Anne said and started tapping something on her phone. "I don't want anything to happen to you on your birthday, Bella." When she saw that her friend was about to leave the address for the taxi, Isabella gently covered the girl's hand with her own palm. "Anne," she said in a quiet but insistent voice, "don't. It's just a waste of money. Let's not try your Ben's patience." Her friend's eyebrows went up in surprise. "What does Ben have to do with this? That's why he gives me the money, so I can have a good time with my friends. He's generous and understanding." Anne laughed, remembering her fiancé. He worked for a large construction company and was paid more than enough to fulfill the every whim of his charming, though sometimes a little capricious bride. "I know that. And that's why I'm asking you again, don't call anyone. I'll walk myself. Let's call again tomorrow." With these words, Bella kissed her best friend on the cheek and strolled leisurely towards her house, enjoying the warm spring air on the way. When the girl's house was only a couple of 100 meters away, a large sports car suddenly pulled up beside her. The window of the driver's seat slid down, and a young man, whose face was dotted with small scars and pimple marks, looked unpleasant in appearance. "Beauty, why are you walking alone? Are you bored? Don't you want to have a good time with me and my friends?" The guy tried to simultaneously smile languidly and shout over the loud music playing in his car. The result was a pathetic picture. "No, thank you," Bella replied briefly, trying not to look at the unpleasant major. "What do you mean, no?" He was surprised and turned to someone who sat in the passenger seat. "Have you heard, men? This girl refuses to keep us company." "Well, wait." The car, which until that moment had been slowly following Isabella, finally stopped. Bella realized that things were worse than she had expected, and so she quickened her step. But at that moment she was blocked by 3 tall guys who jumped out of the sports car. "Where are you going, beautiful?" one of them asked. "You're doing wrong. You can't offend decent men like that. We came to you with an offer, and what are you doing, turning your face away from us?" Isabella boldly looked all 3 of them in the eye, giving them a disdainful look. "Who else would talk about decency here? I told you I don't want to go anywhere with you. Let me through now." "Or what?" one of them asked, smiling wryly, nudging his mate. "Or you'll complain to your boyfriend, or maybe to your husband. I don't see a ring on your ring finger, and a normal bloke wouldn't let you go out alone at a time like this. So don't be a wuss. Just get in the car." The girl choked with indignation, not immediately finding something to say to such a blatant insolence. "I'm going to call the police and scream," she finally managed to say. And at that moment Isabella felt the steel embrace of someone's cold arms close around her. She turned round and saw over her shoulder that she had been grabbed by a pimply-faced boy major. "Help!" Bella shouted as hard as she could, pushing the rest of the air out of her, but was instantly kicked in the throat by one of the muscular scoundrels. "Worry as much as you want, if you can," he grinned. "Nobody can hear you here anyway, and if they did, nobody would care. You know how our people are. If a girl screams in the courtyard in the middle of the night, it means she's a shallow fool who can't be calmed down by her boyfriend. Should we put her in the boot?" "No, it's not interesting that way," shook his head negatively, shook the head of the guy who was the most powerful physique. "Let's get her in the saloon, and me and the men will help you." The huge ambo picked Isabella up by the legs, while the second opened the door and the third helped the major and his mate shove the girl into the car. "No, no, please don't. Help," Bella shouted. But she could only manage suppressed wheezes. Her stomach still ached from the impact, and her lungs felt as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of her lungs at once. Just as Isabella was about to say goodbye to her life, imagining in advance how it might end, police sirens suddenly sounded behind the company. Maybe a patrol car was passing by and heard me, the girl thought hopefully. "What's going on?" "Guys, the cops are coming. Let's go," shouted the leader of the thugs. And immediately his grip on Isabella's legs loosened. "Seriously, what are we going to do? Do we take her with us or not?" the major asked in horror. He, too, was confused and had not expected that anyone could see them in such an inconspicuous courtyard. "Leave her," shouted the head jock. "Anyway, she's a wretch, and we won't get any pleasure from her. Consider yourself lucky." Then Bella was roughly shoved out of the car, and the company of scoundrels fled in an unknown direction on their sports car. The girl's heart was beating as if ready to break through the chest and jump out. The unfortunate Isabella experienced such a powerful attack of fear that she was not immediately able to rise to her feet. Her hands and knees trembled and she gasped for air, but she felt like a fish thrown on the ice. For a second she clenched her eyes tightly, trying to calm down and stop shivering. And then someone on her right asked her sympathetically, "Girl, are you all right? Do you need any help? Should I call an ambulance?" Bella looked where the voice was coming from and saw a young man with glasses and a leather briefcase under his arm. He was looking at her with interest while checking something on his phone. Intercepting her gaze, he explained. "The sirens are just a ringtone sound," the guy explained. I saw that those bastards were going to take you away by force. So the only thing I could think of was to switch on the police siren. Where did you go? Isabella asked, looking around for the police. But of course she didn't see anyone. So no one is coming here then? I'm afraid not. The guy shrugged and leaned over Bella, holding out his hand to her. Let me help you up. Dazed, Isabella accepted the help, and the young man, gently holding her by the waist, helped her to the nearest bench, and then gently sat down. My name is Michael, he introduced himself. I'm sorry if I didn't stand up for you with my fists. It's just that I don't have the physical fitness to deal with 4 men at once, and I had to act fast. Bella looked at him with eyes full of tears and gratitude. What are you saying? On the contrary, I am incredibly grateful to you for your resourcefulness. You saved my life. If not for you, I could have been taken many kilometers away from here and probably killed. Isabella couldn't help crying in front of a stranger, the effects of stress. Nothing to be done about it. Please don't cry. Michael tried to calm her down. Would you like me to walk you home? I'm sure you live around here somewhere. Yes, thank you, she said, wiping away her tears. I'm sorry I'm not bothering you with this. You probably need to go home. You're off work. Bella nodded at his briefcase, but Michael smiled good-naturedly. Yes, my boss had to call me in on my own day off. As always, it was necessary to do something that could wait until Monday. The girl smiled back and gave him her hand. Isabella. It's a pleasure to meet you. As strange as it may sound, I'm very glad you were called into work today. The boy laughed and shook her hand. Me, too. Well, let's go. And they walked the remaining distance to the girl's house. On the way, they didn't talk about anything else. But just before they drove up, Michael asked Isabella for permission to meet with her again, to make sure that she had come to her senses. Sure. Let's meet at Main Street Ice Cream, Bella suggested. I love ice cream. Great. Michael responded and smiled a charming smile that gave Isabella butterflies in her stomach. It was surprising and pleasant at the same time. The girl decided that another meeting with this cultured guy would definitely do her no harm, especially since they seemed to like each other. That night, Isabella was not immediately able to sleep. Too many conflicting emotions raged inside her, paralyzing fear and humiliation from the scumbag story. But at the same time, deep in her heart, she felt a warm sympathy for Michael, who had saved her. He was like a knight on a white horse, only fighting not with a sword, but with his own wit and ingenuity. This turn of events excited Bella, and she looked forward to the next meeting with her new acquaintance. And she was eager to get to know him better. A couple of days later, at the appointed time, the guy and the girl met near the cafe. Michael looked great in his light blue light shirt and light linen trousers. A light beige jacket was elegantly thrown over his shoulders. Isabella was dressed as feminine as possible, a dress with a cherry blossom pattern, light sneaker shoes, and a soft ash pink shawl. The girl had arranged her blonde curls in a beautiful high hairdo, so that the image turned out to be very festive, though simple in execution. When they sat down at the table and the order was brought to them, the couple talked. Bella told the guy about herself and waited with interest for his reaction. She knew that she probably didn't look like any of the girls Michael knew. Fortunately, the guy's reaction was quite positive. I can't believe you're seriously working at a newsagent's? He asked with a slightly enthusiastic smile. Yes, I'm not kidding, Bella answered him cheerfully. I love selling people fresh newspapers and magazines. I can't help it. Isabella laughed. Michael looked at her with undisguised admiration. Then I have to tell you, with 100% responsibility, that you are the prettiest press saleswoman I have ever bought my favorite newspapers from. They both burst out laughing, and then continued their heart-to-heart conversation. Bella felt as if a stone had fallen from her soul. She was very worried that, having learned her place of work, Michael would not want to continue to communicate with her. But it turned out to be exactly the opposite. Well, I'm just an analyst for a financial company, Michael said, fixing his glasses on the bridge of his nose. My job is boring numbers, indicators, but it pays a lot more than teaching. Wait, I don't get it, the girl said. So you taught high school? In college, but not for long, Michael answered her. I soon realized that pedagogy was impossible, without a true vocation, and so I decided to trade the walls of the student body for the stuffy office of an analyst. The guy sarcastically raised his eyebrows, letting the girl know that he did not regret his professional choice. And what about your family? How did they feel about your decision? Bella ventured to ask him about his loved ones. Isabella, Michael's face immediately took on a grim expression. I'm from the orphanage. I'm sorry, but I don't really want to talk about it. Do you understand? Bella nodded. I'm an orphan myself. My mom died 3 years ago. Unable to cope with oncology, we just didn't have the money for the expensive treatment the doctors insisted on. I miss her very much. Isabella's eyes filled with tears. Her heart was filled with familiar pain and longing. She missed her mother terribly, though enough time had passed that, as they say, time had healed the wound. Michael shook her hand with feeling. I'm sorry for your loss, he said, looking her straight in the eye. Bella, you really are the most amazing girl I've ever met, so beautiful and so... What's that? With excitement in her voice, she asked him again. The boy was silent for a second, choosing words, then smiled. Human, simple, but in a good way, he hastened to add. You know, all the girls I know at work are like bright birds. Spectacular exterior, but inside there is an absolute emptiness. Sometimes it seems to me that they don't work for their careers, but for walking around in their new outfits every day in front of the whole office. Bella laughed. The bad thoughts instantly vanished like smoke. Michael portrayed his colleagues so funny that the girl could not hold back a sincere, good-natured laughter. After the cafe, she and Michael went for a walk along the seafront. From it opened just a superb view of the river. They talked for a long time, discussing all sorts of things with each other, what kind of literature they liked, who and what they liked in the cinema. Isabella, who had been working at the press kiosk for several years in a row, was a remarkably well-read girl. On her modest salary, she regularly bought the most popular novelties of modern literature. The girl had an excellent knowledge of English, German, and so-called Scandinavian prose, and she really had a lot to talk about and discuss. Michael and Bella had a lot in common, so the first date was followed by the second and the second by the third. Just a month after meeting, young people officially declared themselves a couple. The girl's work did not embarrass Michael at all, and he was happy to meet her in the evening after closing her small kiosk. Isabella, I've noticed that you get one of those good-looking guys every time you visit, her work partner, Mrs. Mary, told her. Is he your fiancé, suppose? No, not yet. Anyway, Isabella said, blushing to the roots of her hair. Mrs. Mary was a middle-aged woman who had worked at their kiosk recently, but Bella didn't like the way she sometimes looked at her. Mrs. Mary was definitely jealous of her youth and her desire to live, no matter what. While her partner herself had long ago become disillusioned with men and her own dreams of a better future. Watch carefully, Bella, she warned her partner. He's too sweet, not your fiancé. He could easily deceive you. You'll have a lot of tears to wash away. Isabella looked at Mrs. Mary in all seriousness and spoke clearly so that she could distinguish every word. Don't worry so, Mrs. Mary. I can manage my life and my men without your help. My private life has nothing to do with you. Mrs. Mary only grinned unkindly. Oh, girl, I'm trying to help you. In a motherly way, I'm warning you. And you're throwing a stone in my teeth. The woman waved her hand at her young partner. That's how young people are now. You want to them as best as possible, and they in return you and snap back. Let's finish checking the names, Mrs. Mary asked Bella. The girl wanted to change the unpleasant subject as soon as possible. She also wanted to finish her work quickly, so that she could go to another meeting with Michael. So 2 months passed, during which Bella felt absolutely happy. The girl lived in an old one-room flat, inherited from her mother. And here they often met with Michael, who sometimes even stayed with the girl for the night and on weekends. Michael himself explained to Bella that he rented a flat in the city center with one of his acquaintances. Because of this, he could not normally invite his beloved to him. He did not want unnecessary questioning on the part of his mate. The relationships between young people were becoming more and more serious, and Bella waited for a long time that Michael was about to make her an offer. However, this dream of hers was not destined to come true. One evening, the guy came home to Bella in an extremely depressed mood. When asked what happened, he reluctantly replied, "Problems at work. He slowly stretched out, but immediately added, "Don't worry, it's nothing serious, just standard work stuff." Isabella looked at her lover with undisguised excitement. "Can I help you in any way?" asked the girl, who was just cooking in the kitchen and trying to put together a delicious dinner for her lover. The oven timer beeped loudly, informing her that her favorite dish, baked chicken, was ready. "Oh, here comes the chicken," she said, pulling out a hot baking tray and placing it on the table. "Michael, don't worry about work." "I'm sure it will all work out somehow," Isabella said. "Wash your hands and sit down at the table. Dinner is the best cure for the burdens of the day. That's what my mom used to say." Bella smiled, and Michael gave her a faint smile in return, then lazily wandered off to the bathroom. Bella felt that something serious had happened. It was just that her lover didn't want to talk about it. A little later, when they were already sitting at the table, she managed to find out the reason for such a bad mood of the young man. "I'm sick of all this," Michael threw his fork on the table. "If you only knew how tired I am of going to this damn office every day to work for my stupid boss." "Quiet, Michael. Don't shout like that," the girl asked him. "Can you explain what's wrong with you?" Michael looked at her with his beautiful light green eyes instead of answering. He looked pale and somehow haggard. God, what could have upset him so much, Bella wondered to herself. "I'm tired," Bella the boy answered her simply. "Tired of the fact that no matter what I do, I'll remain a mere analyst. A small fry in this world. Really big money that I may never have to see." Isabella looked wistfully at her lover. "Is it really that bad?" "Not at all," Michael exclaimed. "That bastard Black, my boss, only does that to pester me every day. He's not satisfied with my results." The guy shook his fist angrily in the air. "And what do you want with such low sales? Is it my fault your managers don't do anything? It's like this every day, Bella. Every single day this year, it's all about draining everyone else. And he only gave us a pay rise 2 years ago. And that was by a few pennies. God, how tired I am of it. I'm sick of it." Michael hunched over and wrapped his arms around his head. "God, Michael, calm down, sweetheart. Don't be like that." Isabella stroked his back. "Why didn't you tell me before about how bad it was for you?" "I didn't mean to upset you," Bella the young man said. "You're the best thing in my life. How can I put my problems on you?" Bella felt her heart beating harder at the words of her beloved. "You're an important part of my life too, Michael," she answered seriously and looked into his eyes. "That's why we must learn to share everything with each other, both good and bad. Only trust will help us to keep our relationship, trust and love." Michael froze for a second, then put his arms around Bella and kissed her tenderly. "You are the most incredible, sensitive, intelligent and understanding girl in the world, Isabella. I love you." Bella smiled and snuggled against Michael's chest, then asked him in a quiet voice, "If you can't bear to be in this job, maybe you should look for another place. I'm sure that such an excellent specialist like you can find a decent place with a good salary." Michael only sighed heavily and pulled away from the girl. "Well, if it could make a difference, honey. But in every place like this, the same story will repeat itself every time. I'll be working. The others, the ones that came in on the take, will at best do nothing and get the bonus I'm entitled to, and at worst they'll just ruin the whole business. But why do you care so much?" Bella couldn't understand him. If the company goes bankrupt because of the short-sighted actions of its top managers, won't it be their problem? What could be your problem? Michael began to pace her small kitchen. Bella, honey, you just don't understand. If I had a business like this, I would make sure that every employee within my staff was in his or her place. Then I could run things myself, manage the process. We could get married and think about buying our own big and spacious house, having kids again. Cause, what can I give you now? Nothing. I can't do that, Bella. I have to think about tomorrow. I'm a man, after all. Michael went to the window and stared thoughtfully at the silhouettes of the high rises on the horizon. Isabella didn't know how to help her lover in such a situation, so she only asked, "What do you need to start such a company yourself?" The answer pleased her at the same time, but also upset her. "Everything is banal. My beloved money, everything, and always rests on them. Except I can't even get a loan. I don't have anything to pledge to the bank, and the interest rates are crazy. I don't know if I can pay it back. A thought slowly began to form on the periphery of Isabella's mind. She couldn't quite put her finger on what it was, but she seemed to have an idea of how she could help her favorite guy. What if you had a co-signer with collateral who could put in a good word for you in case of emergency? Would you be approved for a loan? Michael turned round sharply, and in his eyes Bella saw a fierce glimmer of hope mixed with uncertainty. Yes, he said slowly. Yes, it would greatly increase the chances of success. Bella bit her lip, considering her actions and words. Of course she was willing to do anything for Michael. A loan wasn't such a big deal after all. Michael would put the money to good use, and with his integrity, persistence, and intelligence, he'd be lucky. He will definitely make a brilliant businessman. She was sure of that. Michael, then consider that you have such a guarantor. Isabella said decisively, I'm willing to help you with a loan if it will help your dream come true. For a second she thought her lover's eyes flashed with a strange fire. But Bella thought it was probably just a figment of her imagination. Still, the decision of the surety was extremely serious, and the girl could not help but worry, thinking it over. Isabella, my girl, my angel. Are you sure you want to do this? Michael asked her, taking the girl by the shoulders. You just don't have to do it if you don't want to. It's not like I'm insisting. I'm just sharing my thoughts with you. Oh, honey, don't, she reassured him. I'm doing this for both of us, for our future together. On Michael's lips played a beautiful, but a little sly smile, as if the guy had already decided everything for himself. Bella thought then that it was, of course, about their house together and the creation of a family. You won't regret it, I swear to you, he assured her. As soon as I open my own business and we get the first profit, we'll apply for a marriage license. You'll be my wife, won't you? Michael asked with a smile, just in case. Are you still asking? Of course, yes, exclaimed a happy Bella and hugged her lover tightly. The next day Michael returned from work, unexpectedly earlier than usual, and immediately rushed Bella, who had that day off. Bella, honey, I've already arranged everything. My friend advised me a great bank, where the interest is low, and the guarantor can easily become a guarantor. All you have to do is bring your passport and the deeds to the flat. So soon? The girl was amazed. Michael, maybe you and I will choose a bank together a little later. Let's see what other options are available. On the face of her lover ran a subtle shadow of discontent and irritation, but he held back, saying aloud as affectionately as possible. What to expect, beloved? Suddenly they have such a unique offer with a limited period of time. Now we'll miss it, and that's it. We can consider the idea a failure. The sooner I get the money, the sooner we can start looking at our own place. Don't you want that? And the wedding? I don't know about you, but I'm going to celebrate it to the full. Only nobody has given us any money, yet the girl tried to reason with him. Honey, please, let's make this decision together. It's all happening too fast. Michael was increasingly difficult to contain his irritation, so he came to the girl and hugged her by the shoulders so hard that Bella involuntarily shrieked. It seemed to her that Michael's usually so gentle fingers suddenly turned into steel pincers. Ow, it hurts, Michael. What are you doing? The girl shrieked at him in surprise. I'm sorry, he immediately released her. It's just that I'm so nervous about this whole loan thing. I want to realize all our dreams as soon as possible. I understand, my love, Bella nodded. I just want everything to go right, to be sure that this bank is reliable. Michael made a resentful face and lifted his chin. Well, if you don't trust my lawyer friend, then. Remember, you were the first one to talk about trust. The girl finally sighed and agreed. All right, let's follow your intuition. Wait for me a minute. I'll just change. Half an hour later, they were on their way to the bank branch, where, having shown the specialist all the necessary documents and waiting for the decision of the commission, Michael received his loan, and Bella became his guarantor, offering as collateral his flat. As soon as Michael's account was the coveted amount, the young man immediately began to tell Isabella about his grandiose plans. According to his assumptions, they will have to close the loan in just 6 months, if the idea, which he has been hatching for years, will be a success among his fellow investors. I've made some connections while working in this stupid office Michael shared with his beloved, and a couple of investors have even agreed to listen to my proposals. Only for this I will have to leave the city for a while, purely for work issues related to production. Michael continued to share his plans. Wait, you mean you're leaving? Isabella looked at him in surprise. But why? You don't have a concrete plan for what you plan to do yet. The business you told me about, of course, looks very tempting. But Michael, the guy, rolled his eyes theatrically. No way, please. How many times do you have to pull me every time? Tell me, don't you believe me? Do you think I'm going to run away with this money and leave you all alone? Bella's insides tightened. She couldn't imagine such a thing. She trusted her fiancé too much. No, of course not, honey, she said, embarrassed. Well, Michael continued. The investors have privately agreed to take me in and show me possible areas where I can put my future equipment. Isn't that a decisive step in the direction of our dream? Isabella smiled weakly at her fiancé. She realized that he was trying, as they call it, to strike while the iron is hot. But only in her soul she always had an uneasy light, when she imagined that she and Michael would have to be separated, even if only for a week. Promise you'll call me every day? Isabella asked him. This is the first time you'll be away from me. It's not a test. I'm just worried. Michael ran his hand gently over her face. I'll not only call you, I'll text you every day, he smiled affectionately. You'll see you'll get tired of me. They spent that evening together. Michael was with Bella, very caring, tender, and the girl felt herself on the seventh heaven from love. There was no one in the world she could trust as much as her adoring fiancé. The young analyst explained to her that he would take a morning flight to another city, and from there to meet with one of the investors. The girl let her lover go without a second thought and started counting the minutes until his return. A couple of hours after Michael's departure, Bella's mobile phone rang, to her surprise. It was her immediate superior calling, and his tone was not at all friendly. Well, Swan, he said sharply. Excuse me? Bella stammered. She really didn't know why the boss would be so angry with her. She and Mrs. Mary had closed the last shift more than well. There had been no shortages. Aren't you ashamed of yourself? Shouted the warden. It's a shame that Mrs. Mary was so worried about you, so protective of you, and you stole from us, you scum. Bella stood in the middle of her small living room and flapped her eyes in confusion. Bella felt as if everything that was happening was not happening to her, as if she were watching some low-brow show on TV. Mr. Sam, let me come over here now, and you can explain everything to me, she asked, because I don't know what happened in there, but I'm sure there's some ridiculous mistake. You'll come, the director grumbled on the other end of the line. Yes, of course you will, and you'll pay me back the whole debt, like a sweetheart, so that you'll be there in an hour. Do you understand? Bella said goodbye briefly and began to pack. In less than an hour, she was already in the office where Mr. Sam Smith, the branch manager of their press kiosk, was sitting. Entering the office, the girl, to her great surprise, found her partner there as well. Mrs. Mary looked tired and anxious, as if she had been up all night. But when she looked at Bella, her eyes were filled with hatred. Ah, here you are. The headmaster started from the doorway and locked the door behind her. But please explain, where did you put 40,000 of the proceeds? What? Bella almost choked with indignation. What 40,000? What are you talking about? I gave the cash to the collectors the day before yesterday. Yeah, Mrs. Mary's a witness. We counted it all together. She, however, threw up her full hands in resentment and shook her head. Bella, let's not do that. Don't involve me in your machinations, please. What machinations? Mrs. Mary, you saw me handing over the bag to the collectors with your own eyes. To her amazement, her partner began to sob, and then cried and put a handkerchief to her eyes. Why are you doing this to me, Bella? Have I ever treated you badly? I'm a grown-up woman. You might say I'm in my 5th decade. Am I going to lie to Mr. Sam? I didn't see that amount of money packed in that bag. That's a fact. What you put in that bag, I have no idea. Mrs. Mary continued to sob. Bella didn't know what to say for herself. There were no cameras in that kiosk. The boss himself had been greedy. He hadn't spent any money on installing them, relying on the honesty of his female employees. And now it turns out Bella was accused of stealing. "Don't you have anything to say to that, Bella?" Mr. Sam asked her, suppressing the anger in his voice. "I trusted you so much. I mean, you've been with us since you were 19. You're like family. And now this betrayal. You live and learn. You can't trust anyone in this world. No one." Bella could barely suppress the urge to cry right here in the office of her boss. She really truly loved this job. After graduating from school, when it turned out that her mother was ill, the girl did not waste time on education and immediately got a job at this kiosk. They paid here correctly every fortnight. And only this money allowed Bella's family to stay afloat at a time when her mother could not physically work as a cleaner in the local school. "Mr. Sam, I swear to you that I had nothing to do with stealing that money," Bella repeated stubbornly. And then out of the corner of her eye, she saw Mrs. Mary grinning into her handkerchief. Bella realized that she had been set up. "So you don't want to give me that money back, do you?" The boss reached for the receiver of the old telephone. "All right, Bella. Then let the police deal with you. After all, you're neither my daughter nor my niece to mess with." "Wait a minute, Mr. Sam," Bella exclaimed in despair. "But let me work the money off if you like. Take all my wages for the next 2 months, but don't call the police." However, the boss only shook his head negatively. "No, there's no way I can allow someone like you to work in my kiosk. Money, of course, from your salary deducted, but so be it. Take pity on you, foolish. But don't go on the next shift. You're fired." At that moment, the girl thought she'd gone deaf. Fired? How could she be fired? She'd worked at Rospechat for so many years. The whole kiosk and every newspaper in it was like her own. However, choosing between dismissal and forfeiture of 2 months' wages or prison, Bella chose the latter. When she and Mrs. Mary left the office, the girl turned to her former partner. "Why did you do this to me, Mrs. Mary? What have I done to offend you so?" The woman squinted angrily, but a victorious smile played on her lips. "You shouldn't have been always happy and cheerful, as if you didn't work in a kiosk, but every day as if you were going out on holiday. You should be more modest, child." And then the partner contemptuously looked at the girl from head to toe. "All those workplace affairs you're having. I've always disliked them. Look at that redhead showing off. No face, no skin. All those suitors chasing after her. No, just a little bit at a time. Maybe life will teach you that you should conduct your affairs modestly and not poison others with your happiness." Bella stood dumbfounded, looking at Mrs. Mary. She had expected anything but this. "So you were jealous of her, were you?" she asked, tears streaming from her own eyes. "Out of ordinary female jealousy?" Mrs. Mary just waved her hand, saying, "Don't be dramatic," and then she added, "You can't prove anything anyway. And I need that money more. I've wanted to go on holiday to the sea for a long time, but I couldn't get the money I needed." "Be glad you got off so lightly, you fool," said Mrs. Mary. "I've been working in shops for years. A mouse like you would be a piece of cake to deal with." With these words, Mrs. Mary looked round, and making sure that no one could hear them, walked quietly and leisurely away in the direction of the exit. She felt as if she had really just been dumped in the mud. Unable to contain the storm of warring emotions any longer, the girl stepped out into the fresh air and decided to call Michael. She realized that it must have been a short time since he had boarded the plane. By now, her fiancé must have just checked into the hotel. But she could not wait any longer, and, having dialed the cherished number, she was ready to hear her dear and beloved voice, when suddenly, instead of her fiancé, she was answered by the operator's dry mechanical answering machine. "The subscriber is switched off or is out of the network coverage area." Isabella Swan glanced at her wristwatch and frowned. By all plans, Michael should have landed by now. An uneasy feeling crept into her heart. Had something happened to the plane? Bella remembered what Michael had said about his flight and called the airport. And when a polite employee explained to her that the flight she was asking about did not exist, Isabella, having lost her balance abruptly, fell to the floor without feelings. When Bella regained consciousness, no one was around. Luckily, she hadn't been lying there long, so at least she hadn't been cleaned out. But who was she kidding? She'd been cheated, it seemed. In one of the most sneaky and lowly ways possible, they had invaded her trust to help her apply for a loan. The girl found it hard to believe that Michael could run away with the money, depriving her of essentially everything. There was nothing to pay the interest to the bank. She had no job. That meant her flat would be taken by the bank very soon. Isabella didn't want to accept what was happening. It seemed that her whole life, which had been going well, was shattering like a crystal vase that had fallen to the floor. The girl, for the next few days, without ceasing, called Michael, but each time she answered the operator, claiming that the number of her fiancé out of network. Most likely, Michael has just thrown out the SIM card and now happily hiding somewhere with a few $1,000,000, which so successfully divorced the poor girl. For Bella, however, remained a mystery, whether the cunning analyst really saved her then from the bandits or it was all a carefully thought-out plan. Well, I guess I'll never know, she thought sadly to herself and deleted Michael's number from her phone book. For the next week, Isabella Swan was in a terrible state. The last time she had felt this bad was after her mother's death. She wanted to call Anne first. Surely her friend wouldn't judge her. Perhaps she could help her think of something to do with the money. But Bella was too proud for that and didn't want to pressure her best friend with her problems. And then the girl saw in Anne's social networks that she and her fiancé flew on holiday to some distant warm islands. Isabella saw this as a kind of sign, saying that she is destined to pass this difficult test alone. Then Bella began to look for a new job. Here she received an unpleasant surprise. None of the little, or even decent firm did not want to see in its staff a person without education, who's only experienced the sale of press. No matter how erudite Bella looked at interviews, the answer was always the same: "I'm sorry, but you are not suitable for us." In the end, despairing, the girl opened a newspaper of free adverts and there unexpectedly saw an unusual vacancy. The country house required a maid with the functions of a carer. The patient was an elderly businessman who, due to illness, could not serve himself. Bella thought that she could help this man because she took care of her mother when she was ill. And the fact that it will be necessary to clean the house, so it's nothing. The salary in the advert promised a very decent salary. So the girl decided to try her luck and called the number given. The next morning, a big black SUV with beautiful license plates picked her up. Bella immediately realized that it was for her, as the day before she had agreed with the manager of the businessman that she would be brought to their mansion. On the way to the mansion, she met the businessman's driver, John Carter. The kind, cheerful chap immediately put Bella at ease. He told his young passenger funny anecdotes and at the same time taught her how to behave when meeting with the businessman. "You, the main thing, Mr. Tom Brown, do not be afraid," John Carter admonished her. "He is generally a very good man. Only his fate is not an easy one. His wife died a couple of years ago in a car crash. He's been on the wane ever since. And lately there's a kind of sadness in his eyes. He needs moral support, someone to be there for him all the time." "Why don't you call a professional doctor for him?" Bella asked. "He doesn't want to," John said calmly. "Of course he has a doctor who visits him from time to time. But Mr. Brown himself doesn't like it very much. All those white coats, the smell of medicine, they make him nervous. But I warn you, I've got a bit of experience too. I've only looked after my mum, so I only know the basics of medicine." "Somehow I think that will be more than enough," the driver answered her and smiled. When the girl was brought to Brown's estate, that was the businessman's surname, Bella opened her mouth involuntarily, seeing the scale of the whole plot. There was a rose garden, and figures of trees, and even something that she had seen before only on the pages of magazines, namely a small-shaped labyrinth, made entirely of greenery. And the businessman's mansion itself was truly astonishing to the imagination of the average person. It resembled a small medieval castle, only equipped with all the latest technology and cameras. Just amazing. Isabella exhaled, looking at all this splendor. "Yes, this house is very impressive when you're not used to it." John stood next to her. "When I first got a job here, I couldn't believe for a week that I could live in such luxury. But then I got used to it." A little later, the manager scrutinized Bella's personal file and, to her luck, decided that she was quite suitable for them. Another day was needed to move to the millionaire's mansion all the things necessary for the girl, after which she was fully ready to start work. The girl was taken to the office for domestic staff, where they gave her a uniform and explained her duties. Bella listened very attentively. The last thing in the world she wanted was to accidentally forget something in her long list of daily chores. "Good morning, Mr. Tom Brown." She said a shy hello to her ward as she was led into his room and introduced to the businessman. "I'll be helping you now." Mr. Brown was a man paralyzed from the waist down who looked to be about 65 years old. His pleasant, noble appearance inspired Bella with some confidence, though her heart was shattered after the story with Michael. Isabella now saw a catch in everything and was afraid to trust men, even in small things. She realized that it was foolish to lump them all together. Mr. Brown looked at his new maid and smiled. "Your name is Isabella Swan," he said, looking curiously at her fiery red hair. "Yes, that's right," she answered, a little embarrassed. "I applied for a job with you. I was told by the manager that you needed an ordinary man for this position." The millionaire continued to look at her with obvious interest, so that the girl involuntarily became uncomfortable. Finally, he asked, wheeling up to her in his buggy. "Bella, may I ask you an indiscreet question?" Isabella felt herself blushing, but nodded in agreement. "Is your hair naturally this interesting color?" At that moment, Bella's mind began to think that this old rich man might like her not so much as a carer, but as a woman. Fortunately, it turned out not to be so. "Yes, it's my natural color. My mom had the same color." For a second, Bella thought that a slight shadow of alarm ran across Mr. Brown's face, but she wasn't sure. The businessman answered her nothing but offered. "Will you play checkers with me? Can you?" He asked with a slight slyness and winked at the girl. "Of course, I don't like to play chess, but checkers is always welcome." Bella smiled politely and began to arrange multicolored checkers on the board. The maid and the businessman played 3 games at once, after which it was time for a massage and helping the man in a number of other procedures. Fortunately, the girl did not have to do Mr. Brown's bathing. The businessman had a special person from among the domestic servants for this purpose. When all the procedures were finished and Mr. Brown lay down to rest, Isabella decided to tidy up the room. She gathered some things and was about to wipe down the bookcase, when suddenly a loud female voice came from downstairs. "Where's Daddy?" "What do you mean he's sleeping? This is actually my parents' house. I can come when I want. You shouldn't have come," Isabella heard a few minutes later. A strikingly beautiful young woman burst into the room like a whirlwind. It seemed to Bella that before her stood a real supermodel, which she as a child so fond of looking at for hours on the pages of old library magazines. "Daddy, I'm home." "Oh, who the hell are you?" she asked Isabella rudely, and looked her over from head to toe with a frankly snobbish, contemptuous look. "Caroline, calm down. This is my new maid," said Mr. Brown in a hoarse voice. "Isabella, please meet my daughter Caroline." "How do you do?" said the girl, her voice trembling with excitement. But Caroline only turned away, throwing her through her teeth, dismissed. Isabella did not immediately realize that the rich woman was addressing her, but when she looked at her over her shoulder, she quickly left the room. She could still hear Caroline snorting unpleasantly at the door when she was distracted by Mrs. Emma telling her that dinner for the domestic staff was ready, and everyone was already gathering in the staff kitchen. A couple of hours later, when Isabella re-entered Mr. Brown's room, she thought the man looked somehow too pale. "Mr. Brown, what's the matter?" "Are you ill?" Bella asked excitedly and cautiously approached his bed. The man was silent in reply. Something incomprehensible flashed in his gaze. Bella thought that there was something wrong with his heart. She took his blood pressure just in case, and when she saw that the numbers on the display were very high, she rushed out of the room and downstairs. "John. Mrs. Emma. Somebody. Help," she called out. "What's the matter?" asked the butler, followed by the housekeeper. "Mr. Brown's not well. His blood pressure's off the scale. His heartbeat too," said Bella. "Oh God, not that," Mrs. Emma spluttered. "He's having another attack. John, I'll call a doctor. You drive up to the gates of the village. Show the paramedics the way so they can get here quicker. Don't leave your master until the paramedics arrive. Do everything you can to keep him unconscious." Bella nodded and ran back out. When she ran out into the room, she saw that the businessman's skin was already beginning to take on an unhealthy color. In addition, he was shaking as if he'd been electrocuted. Isabella took some ammonia to his nose and put a soft, double-folded handkerchief in his mouth so that the man would not bite his tongue in a fit. God forbid. The girl pinned him to the bed with her hands as hard as she could. 10 minutes later, an ambulance arrived at the millionaire's mansion. The man was promptly relieved of the seizure, and the doctor, looking at Bella, only sadly shook his head. "The attacks have been getting more frequent lately," he said. "We'd like to take Mr. Tom Brown to the hospital, but he's absolutely against it. Stubborn. We've controlled the seizure and given him sleeping pills, so he'll sleep for a few hours. After that, hopefully he'll feel better. It's good that you were there for him. At times like this, it's important to have someone who cares and knows a little first aid." "What is his illness?" the girl ventured to ask. "We're not sure ourselves," said the doctor uncertainly. "At first we thought it was epilepsy. Seizures damage the cerebral cortex, hence the paralysis of the limbs. But now it's too ambiguous to be certain. It could very well be a tumor that we have no way of locating." "So the prognosis is not good at all?" Isabella asked sadly. "I'm afraid that's something I can only discuss with family members." "You are just his carer," replied the doctor, looking sadly at the millionaire. "I think we should all prepare for the worst soon." After the doctors left, Mr. Tom Brown's face regained its natural blush and color. Isabella decided to see which of his prescribed medicines the man had taken last. It might well be that Mr. Brown had an intolerance to one or more of the components of a particular drug, and then much would be clearer. In the process of checking the prescription, she found a strange blue jar at the bottom of the chest of drawers without any identifying marks. There was nothing like it on the list, and it seemed a little suspicious to Bella. She opened the lid and looked inside. At the bottom were several bright red pills, the purpose of which remained a mystery to the girl. Bella asked the housekeeper, Mrs. Emma, about the drugs, but she couldn't give her a clear answer, saying that all lists are strictly controlled by Brown's doctor and his daughter. The medicines are very expensive, so Caroline regularly brings her father everything he needs from the list herself. Isabella, being a kind but fair-minded person by nature, was determined to find out what this medicine was all about. While Mr. Tom Brown was unconscious, the girl read to him classical works of Russian literature, Pushkin's poems, and something from Spanish drama. The man had been asleep for over 10 hours. While putting another volume on the shelf, Bella accidentally elbowed some green book, and it fell to the floor and opened in the middle. Clumsy, she scolded herself, picking up the book. But then she noticed something that made her squat down and fall forward on her knees. An old photograph the size of a small postcard had fallen out of the book. Isabella picked it up and turned it over. At the same moment, the world around her shook, and her eyes darkened sharply. "Mum," Isabella whispered, looking at the photo. The picture was indeed Bella's mother, only very young and beautiful. Isabella recognized the photo immediately, for she had a small silver pendant in the shape of a heart hanging from her chest. One half of it opened if the pendant was pressed lightly. Inside was the exact same photo, only scaled down by a factor of 3. But how could this be possible? Bella asked herself, shifting her gaze from her own photograph to the one she had found in the book. The maid decided not to ask the businessman anything for the time being, as he was already having a hard time. When Caroline arrived the next day, she was in tears as she clung to her sick father's chest. "Daddy, how did you frighten us all?" She spoke in what seemed to be a deliberately loud and false voice. It seemed to be done so that everyone in the house could hear her lamentations. "Come on," Mr. Tom Brown patted her on the back. He had regained consciousness and was beginning to talk and move around in his wheelchair again. "Tell me how your new fiancé is doing. When are you going to introduce him to me?" Caroline smiled so broadly that it looked as if her cheekbones were about to collapse. A little later she answered, "It's so sweet that you're interested in everything that's going on in my life. Soon my beloved and I will surely come here together to ask for your blessing. But you get well first, because I pay such a lot of money to these idlers, and they bring you to a new attack." At the last words, Caroline looked at Bella and John Carter, who were standing there, with such an angry look that it seemed that the beauty had one wish in her heart, that Bella and the businessman's driver would turn to dust right here, right in front of her eyes. "So these fellows, on the contrary, did their best to save my life," said Mr. Tom Brown. "Especially Isabella, a very good girl. Don't scold her." Caroline gave Bella a look of pure fury. Then she kissed her father on the forehead and said, as if nothing had happened, "All right, let them live for now. Dad, I'll go then, because I have to go to our office, some things with your partners to solve. You don't mind, do you?" On the face of the millionaire blossomed a benign smile. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'm just happy that my business has such a worthy successor. Tell Mr. Harper not to rush into another deal. We'll have to see how those Chinese behave." Mr. Tom Brown and his daughter Caroline discussed some business matters, after which Caroline sailed past Bella like a swan across the surface of a night lake, leaving the room. The maid, however, was determined and slipped after the beauty into the corridor. "Wait, please, Caroline," she asked the girl. She stopped half-stepping and turned slowly to Isabella Swan. "Are you talking to me?" she asked, stretching her vowels. "I think you're the only one here. I was checking your father's medication the other day, and I found a strange vial, blue in color, with no labels or inscriptions. It had red pills inside." "So?" The heiress raised her head. "Do you know what kind of medicine it is? It just wasn't on the list. And I think Mr. Tom Brown is allergic, maybe to some drug." "No, that's out of the question," Caroline exclaimed and flung her finest silk scarf over her shoulder defiantly. "I personally buy all my dad's medication. And what you're describing are, just so you know, very expensive vitamins from Germany. They are sold by the piece. That's why I put them in a separate vial, so as not to mix them up." "Ha," said Bella. "Vitamins, then? Then all the more reason to have them analyzed. Maybe there's some exotic ingredient in their composition that could provoke such a reaction? I've heard that expensive vitamins can have some pretty—" Caroline interrupted her with a regal wave of her hand. "I don't have time to listen to any more of this nonsense. Everything I bring my father is the best, and there can't be any reactions there. After all, what am I reporting to some maid? Go scrub the floors. Or don't you have anything else to do?" Bella decided not to poison her soul, and with a short nod went to the kitchen. However, as soon as she left the estate, Isabella Swan crept cautiously into the garage to John Carter. "John, can I talk to you for a moment?" the girl asked him. As the guy approached her, Bella whispered, afraid that someone might hear her. "I have a huge favor to ask of you. Would you mind driving me into town tomorrow? I want to take something to a private clinic for analysis, and I wanted to borrow some money from you to pay for the examination." John smiled and winked playfully at the girl. "What's that? Then, what's the drive?" Bella shifted from foot to foot, but finally decided to share her suspicions with the driver. "This may be completely crazy, of course, but I want to check out Mr. Tom Brown's vitamins, the ones in the blue vial. Something tells me they're not that helpful." John immediately became serious. "I've worked for Mr. Tom Brown for a long time. I can safely say he's like family to all of us here, and I'll do everything I can to make sure he gets better." The next morning, Bella and John went to the clinic, covering themselves with the excuse that they were going to the supermarket for some of the products that the owner of the mansion asked Bella personally. The girl really hoped that during these few hours of absence nothing fatal would happen to him. Isabella Swan had been looking after Mr. Tom Brown on her day off anyway, and had spent some time with him before leaving, following all the instructions of his attending physician. When they arrived at the laboratory, Bella gave the specialists 3 red pills, after which John Carter still paid them extra for the speed of the examination. Eventually, after several hours, during which the driver and the maid had indeed visited the shop and bought groceries, the lab technician who conducted the tests came out to them with the conclusion in his hands. His face was extremely puzzled. "Where did you say you bought these vitamins?" he asked, looking at the papers. "In Germany," replied Bella calmly. "Why, is there something wrong with them?" The medic's face darkened in an instant. "If in Germany patients are prescribed heavy psychotropic drugs as vitamins without a prescription, then I think it's time for me to leave medicine. It is absolutely forbidden for a normal, healthy person to take such a cocktail." "Are you serious?" John couldn't help himself. "So you mean that it's not even additives?" Bella was astonished to the core. She leaned lightly on John's shoulder to keep from falling. "Never before in my life have I encountered a situation like this. Tell me, what exactly can happen to a person if they take this for a long period of time? The maid asked. There can be many variations, said the doctor. But in the vast majority of cases, it is paralysis of consciousness. Some of the signs of epilepsy are possible, but in the end, it always ends with the death of the patient. God, thank you, doctor. She thanked the laboratory assistant and, taking from him the document with the conclusion and expertise, hurried back to the millionaire's house. Do you realize what this means? She said to John on the way home. Mr. Tom Brown has been deliberately poisoned with these pills. All the symptoms of Brown's illness are exactly the same. The driver looked worried, as did the maid. But there was a look of doubt on his face. It is, of course, astonishing, but just. Who would want to do such a thing? I tell you, everyone in the house is very fond of the master. I think the answer is obvious. Caroline buys all the drugs. Besides, she's admitted to me herself that she thinks those awful things are vitamins. She also lied to me about Germany. I don't quite understand why a daughter would poison her own father. Then John couldn't take it any longer and pulled over. Parked on the curb. Bella. There really is something to this. Caroline, she's not related to Mr. Tom Brown. Brown married her mother when she had a child. That was Caroline, only 5 years old at the time. So Mr. Tom Brown adopted her. Oh God. Isabella understood. Now that her mother was dead. And there's no telling what kind of accident it was, maybe not without her involvement. And she's decided to eliminate her stepfather too, so she can take over his company. Why? I mean, she's already running the place pretty well. We must inform the owner as soon as possible. The young driver nodded and started the engine. God forbid she should realize that you suspect something. She's a very cunning woman. When they reached the mansion, it was discovered that Mr. Tom Brown had had another attack, and a couple of hours before, his favorite stepdaughter had been in the house again. The doctor who examined the businessman came to a disappointing conclusion. I'm afraid our Mr. Tom Brown won't survive another one of these attacks. And there won't be any more, said Isabella resolutely, taking out the vial and showing it and the report to the doctor. This was the cause of Mr. Brown's illness. Mr. Tom Brown will recover if he is not given these substances. The doctor looked at the pills in amazement and then read the report. But that's a drastic change. We need to call the police. We don't have enough evidence, said Bella. And we can't disturb Mr. Tom Brown now. But there are other ways of approaching it. A few hours later, Mrs. Emma, the housekeeper, rang and, unable to hold back her tears, asked Caroline to come. Caroline, please come right away at once. Not a minute. Your father is dying. Yes, he is. He's been sick again. The doctor said it's over. Caroline rushed in almost lightning fast and entered the house with a stride as sure and firm as a true mistress might enter a mansion. Where is father? What is the matter with him? Said the beautiful heiress menacingly. John then very politely escorted her to Mr. Tom Brown's room. He was lying unconscious under a drip, but he looked quite weak. The very life seemed to be draining out of him. Leave us alone. Caroline angrily ordered John, then slammed the door of the room right in front of the driver's nose. Father? Caroline spoke softly as she approached the dying businessman's bedside. Really? Have you finally deigned to leave this world and spare me and your business from your perpetual grousing? The pretty girl took a chair and sat down next to her stepfather. A gloating smile blossomed on her face. God, who knew how long I've waited for this. I can't believe how happy I am. You know, I was starting to worry. Why aren't my pills helping you finally get off your feet? Turns out all you had to do was wait a little longer. Well, you'll go feed the worms, just like my mom, who never had enough money. And me. I'll finally get down to the real business and make our company, no, sorry, father, my company proud of the whole country, no exaggeration. At this heartbreaking moment, the door of the room opened and a police investigator appeared on the doorstep with an open crust. Who are you? Caroline exclaimed. What do you think you're doing? The investigator walked unceremoniously up to the young woman and with a loud snap, handcuffed her wrists. Now, if anyone will recognize you, it will be your cellmates, the policeman said with a smile. Major Wilson, Detective Squad. How dare you? She was indignant. I was saying goodbye to my terminally ill father. You disrupted our last meeting. How despicable. That you tried to poison the man who gave you absolutely everything in this life, Bella said sternly, following John and the housekeeper into the businessman's bedroom. Fortunately, we were able to save Mr. Tom Brown from your monstrous pills. He's asleep now. But as soon as you are where you belong, namely in prison, your foster father will be immediately transferred to the best clinic where he will be properly cared for, and where you won't get to him. John threatened her with his fist. God, I'm glad Mr. Tom Brown didn't hear any of that, Mrs. Emma said quietly, and put her handkerchief to her eyes, which were already full of tears. It was so good that it was all over at last. Yes, the most important thing is that he is safe now. Bella nodded, smiling at her. Mr. Brown was transferred to a private clinic, where he was immediately given all the necessary treatment to remove, or at least eliminate as much as possible, the effects of the pills that had been poisoning him, as the test showed for almost 2 years. It took a long time for the man to recover, but he was still able to return to his usual life. Although the businessman could no longer walk fully and now moved with the help of a graceful cane, he was still glad that he could move on his own. When he was told of Caroline's betrayal, the businessman remained silent for a long time, unable to utter a word. It had wounded him to the very heart. However, he was still immensely grateful to Bella and everyone else that they did not leave him to his fate, helped the elderly businessman to save the most important thing he still had, his life. In gratitude for his rescue, he helped Bella close all her debts to the bank. Bella had to tell everything, as she could have lost her flat at that point. Wealthy businessman Mr. Tom Brown connected all his connections. The millionaire calculated that Michael at that moment was abroad in Greece, and he managed to arrest him. He cheated another, this time very wealthy lady. Later it turned out that the young man for many years has been engaged in a similar dark trade. So Bella wasn't his only victim. And what was Isabella Swan's biggest offense? The guy really did plan their encounter in advance, only he thought it was Anne, the girl's rich friend. He must have got it mixed up. And then he thought the wool from the lousy sheep. Now he was waiting for a long prison term. And he will have a chance to think about how many unhappy women he deceived, and how many fates he broke. Bella continued to work at the businessman's house. She became friends with John Carter, and later their sympathy grew into something more. John was completely different from Michael. He was honest, genuine, and most importantly, he loved Isabella for who she was and didn't try to use her for any dirty purposes. As for the photographs, Isabella once plucked up the courage to ask Mr. Tom Brown, "How can it be that my picture and the picture you have in one of your books are of the same woman? Is that your mum?" The millionaire asked her in amazement, studying the photograph in his own photo. "Wasn't her name Patricia by any chance?" "That's right," she nodded. "Did you know her?" Mr. Tom Brown shuddered and sank slowly into his chair. "Is that what it was that caught my eye about you the first time we met?" he said slowly. "You look just like your mother. Especially the hair. You see, Bella, I was very fond of your mother once. No, not really. Patricia was my first and only love, the woman I wanted to spend my life with." "What happened? Why didn't you do it?" the girl asked him cautiously. "Everything is simple to the point of banality," sighed the businessman. "My parents were so against our marriage that they forced me to leave Patricia and go to England to study. They wanted me to marry a girl from a powerful family and set a condition, either a life with Patricia, but in poverty because I'm disinherited, or the opportunity to continue the family business." "And you chose the second," Bella clarified. "Yes, I chose family and money," said Mr. Brown sadly. "If you only knew how many times I regretted that decision. But it was too late. Your mum must have taken offense and left town for good. We lived in another state when we were kids." "That's true," Bella confirmed. "But then we came back. Mum had always lived very poor, and it was always hard on her. She died of cancer. She was in a lot of pain." When the millionaire looked at the girl, there was an inexpressible pain in his eyes. A few moments later, however, he suddenly asked, "Bella, do you know who your father is?" "No," the girl answered simply. Mom never liked to talk about it. Once, however, she said that he was an unworthy man. But that's all. At that second, Bella began to understand what Mr. Brown was getting at. "No," she said slowly. "You don't think that?" The elderly businessman fell to his knees in front of her. "Bella, please let me do a paternity test. What if you're my daughter? What if my Patricia left me a blood heir?" Isabella Swan, though completely confused by her feelings, still agreed. The next day they went to the clinic, where they did all the necessary tests, and a few days later the paternity of Mr. Tom Brown was confirmed. He was indeed Isabella's biological father. Apparently, when he left for England, his beloved was already pregnant, and not having time to tell the happy news to her fiancé who left her, ran away to another city. My darling daughter, the elderly businessman hugged the girl and at the same time covered her face with kisses. How happy I am that fate has brought you to me in my old age." Daddy, Bella whispered back, unable to believe the miracle. Of course, Isabella forgave her father for the offense he had committed in his youth. Times were different then. And Mr. Tom, to some extent, was also understandable. The girl was sincerely glad that now they had found each other again, and that she had such a wonderful family after all the hardships that she had to endure because of Michael. 6 months later, Bella married John Carter. Father approved the candidacy of a young and faithful driver, in gratitude making him head of security in one of his banks. John was very happy about this. He loved Bella, and he loved Mr. Tom like his own father. And now it turned out he was his father-in-law. But isn't it a miracle, the lad thought sometimes. John honestly performs his duties and is considered one of the best employees of Mr. Brown's company. The wedding was lavish and beautiful. John and Bella spent it outdoors, surrounded by loyal friends and huge floral arches, hung with bright garlands. It was a magical wedding, which the girl remembered for the rest of her life. And 3 months later, Bella gave her husband the most desirable gift in the world, the news that she is expecting her firstborn. John all the pregnancy looked after his wife, as no man in the world would not do it. In any case, so thought Bella herself, taking from her loving husband another bunch of favorite grapes. After the due date, they had a wonderful baby girl, which the couple decided to call Mia. Parents are very hopeful that the grandfather will have time to see her wedding, while Mr. Tom is constantly fiddling with his granddaughter and considers her the most beautiful woman in the world after his daughter. There is still a lot of time ahead for this family, and they will enjoy every day they have on this earth.